Chapter 601. Wuxia didn't run away. Tan Xing exclaimed. Everyone thought that after the Holy Eve's spiritual land showed enough power, Wuxia would definitely use the Pillar of Divine Secrets to escape back to the 9 regions. Unexpectedly, he did not leave. At this moment he was standing in the spiritual land looking up at the sky. There was not even the slightest bit of panic on his face. That was strange. However, Tan Xing was happy to see this. If Wuxia didn't run away, then there was hope to kill him. It seems that he won't give up this spiritual land unless he has no other choice, Xiaoliang said calmly. Class, a spiritual land was very valuable. Even if it was only a small spiritual land, it wasn't something that ordinary people could own. No one would give it up so easily. This is going to be a good show. Tan Xing grinned. He hid the Tianji pillar. Xiaoliang looked at a certain spot in the spiritual land. The last time he came here with Tan Xing, the Tianji pillar was there. However, looking at it now, the Tianji pillar was empty. Clearly it was hidden by an array. Hiding the divine pillar was obviously to hide its existence. What was Wuxia trying to do? Xiaoliang seemed to have thought of something and was slightly moved. If things were really as he thought, then Wuxia was too bold. In the air, Wuxia's figure was reflected in Huo Liaoyuan's eyes when the concealment formation lost its effect. Even though it was their first time meeting, Huo Liaoyuan still recognized him at first glance. His blazing eyes stared coldly at the figure below as if he was looking at a dead man. Boom, boom, boom. Continuous sounds were heard. Along with the chaos of spiritual energy, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land attacked the spiritual land's protective array. The scene of more than 150 cultivators attacking at the same time was spectacular. Even though their cultivation bases were uneven, it still caused the colorful lights to be dazzling. Their power was monstrous, and the light screen of the protective formation dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then it began to tremble. Xiaoliang, who had been watching this scene in the dark, frowned. The situation didn't seem to be right. This defensive array was a little too weak. The last time he came here with Xiaoliang and Wei Kei, they had also attacked the defensive formation here. However, the strength of the formation at that time was much stronger than it was now. Was it because of the rearrangement? Before he could figure it out, the protective formation shattered with a loud bang. The fluorescent light drifted all over the sky, and the entire spiritual land was completely exposed to the vision of the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. A large number of cultivators were like cats that had smelled the scent of fish. They immediately rushed forward and poured into the spiritual land. Streams of qi locked onto Lu Yi and the others from afar, bursting with killing intent. At this moment, Lu Yi, who had been standing motionless in place, moved. He took out a large array jade pendant from his bosom and poured his spiritual power into it. In the next moment, a layer of light that was even more dazzling than the formation suddenly appeared out of thin air and quickly enveloped the entire spiritual land. After the first floor, it was the second floor. However, the second floor's light curtain was vaguely different from the first floor. However, the sudden change made the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land unable to distinguish it at all. The cultivators who hadn't rushed into the spiritual land bumped into the light curtain and stopped one after another, revealing a look of astonishment. Generally speaking, there would only be one protective formation set up in a place. This was because the protective strength of the formation was directly related to the spiritual power stored on a daily basis. Even if a second one was set up, if it couldn't store too much spiritual power, it wouldn't be of much use. Instead, it would share the power of the formation. Moreover, if the invaders had the ability to break the first formation, they would certainly have the ability to break the second one. Therefore, instead of sharing the power and increasing the risk for no reason, it was better to concentrate the power in one place. However, Wuxia's spiritual land had 2 protective formations. The power of the second formation was even more powerful than the first one. Xiaoliang's previous guess came true. He couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "This guy is so vicious." Tan Xing frowned. "Brother Xiao, what did you see?" Xiaoliang said, "The first layer of the protective formation is just a pretense to show the enemy that it's weak. The second layer is the real protective formation." No wonder the protective formation just now gave off a very weak feeling. It was Wuxia's intention. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was in trouble. More than 150 cultivators were now divided into 2 groups by the protective formation. One group had more than 70 cultivators and they were inside the formation. The other group had less than 80 cultivators and they were outside the formation. This sudden change shocked many of the cultivators. However, they quickly calmed down. This was because under Huo Liaoyuan's lead, they were attacking with absolute power. No matter what the enemy did, it was just a last-ditch struggle. Only Huo Liaoyuan frowned. He felt an inexplicable sense of uneasiness in his heart, as if something bad was about to happen. There was no need for him to give the order. The cultivators outside the formation attacked the formation once again. Since they had the ability to break the first protective formation, they naturally had the ability to break the second one. Although they had lost nearly half of their manpower, it would just take them a little more time. Inside the formation, more than 70 cultivators ignored the dense pack of demon wolves below. They all stared at Wuxia and the others. They all flew forward, and when they were at a suitable distance, they circulated their spiritual energy and were about to attack. Wuxia grabbed an array flag and looked up at the sky. He waved the array flag in his hand lightly. Sky restriction. The space of the entire spiritual land seemed to distort at this moment, and in the next moment, the uninvited guests who had intruded into the spiritual land all revealed looks of shock and bewilderment as they screamed and fell from the air. At this moment, everyone felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on them. It was so heavy that they couldn't breathe. When the sudden change occurred, Xiao Liang and Tan Xing, who were hiding in the dark, felt their eyelids twitch. They had suffered from the sky restriction formation before, and now that they thought about it, they couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. Huo Liaoyuan's eyes widened in anger as he exclaimed, "Sky restriction formation? How could it be a sky restriction formation? How could there be a sky restriction formation?" Although he had long heard that Wuxia of the Jade Blood sect had extremely high attainments in Array Dao, he was only a Cloud River cultivator. How could he have the ability to set up a sky restriction formation? One had to know that even an ordinary true lake cultivator might not be able to set up such a formation. Moreover, there was no information about a sky restriction formation in the information he received. Did the person who passed on the information intentionally hide this matter? Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Huo Liaoyuan was no longer as calm as before. His body turned into a fiery light as he rushed forward and shouted, "Quickly break the formation." Nearly half of the people were trapped in the formation. Under the sky restriction formation, everyone was falling. The situation was unprecedentedly bad. Before he brought people here, he had never thought that such an inconceivable thing would happen. As his voice fell, shrill cries of agony rang out one after another. Dazzling sword lights flashed through the spiritual land. The power of powerful spells began to be released. Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan had made their moves. Wherever the sword lights and spells passed, blood splattered and life dissipated. One by one, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land lost their lives before they even landed on the ground. In just an instant, 5 or 6 people died on the spot. Giant armor charged out and leaped dozens of feet into the air. It punched the head of an unsteady sacred fire sect cultivator. This Dharma cultivator did not even make a sound before his head exploded like a watermelon. Giant armor charged out of the blood mist and locked onto its second target. That cultivator was instantly frightened out of his wits. The wolf pack, which had remained motionless all this time, suddenly sprang into action. Their vigorous bodies dashed forward, and their snow-white fur fluttered in the wind. Some of the demon wolves opened their mouths as they dashed forward, shooting out green crescent-shaped wind blades, which left behind dark red marks on the bodies of their enemies. However, there were not many demon wolves that could use wind blades to attack. Most of the demon wolves directly pounced on the unsteady cultivators, biting and scratching them. The screams became even more intense and mournful. Outside the formation, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, led by Huo Liaoyuan, felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. They had originally thought that they had an absolute advantage and could crush the enemy in this battle, but it had unfolded in such an unacceptable situation. Seeing familiar faces dying one after another in front of their eyes and being torn to pieces, the anger and sorrow in everyone's hearts erupted like a volcano. "Run!" someone shouted. The cultivators who were lucky enough to survive woke up from a dream and fled outside. Some people managed to escape to the edge of the formation with great difficulty, only to find in despair that they could not escape at all. There was a thick light screen in front of them, blocking their hopes of escaping. The formation had 2 layers. The first layer was the defensive formation, and the second layer was the entrapment formation. From the moment these cultivators stepped into the spiritual land, they were destined to not have a good ending. "Don't come over." The cultivators who fled to the edge of the formation screamed in horror. They only had time to wave the spiritual weapon in their hands before they were drowned by the figures of more than 10 demon wolves. The sound of flesh being torn apart could be heard, making one's hair stand on end. Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng's eyelids twitched wildly. Not to mention the people of the Holy Eve spiritual land, even they did not expect the situation to unfold like this. They thought that Lu Ye would use the Pillar of Tianji to escape back to the 9 regions the moment he saw the Holy Eve spiritual land attacking. However, the result was that the Holy Eve spiritual land suffered heavy losses. From the beginning to the end, Lu Ye only activated the Jade Pendant and waved the array flag in his hand. The effect that a powerful array cultivator could bring to bear in such a situation was actually so terrifying. Boom boom boom, loud noises suddenly came from all over the spiritual land. The cultivators who were fleeing in all directions had inadvertently triggered the explosion array set up by Lu Ye. Flames surged, spiritual energy went berserk, and screams were drowned out. In just a dozen breaths of time, more than half of the cultivators in the spiritual land were dead or injured. The remaining cultivators were all shrouded in an aura of despair. Li Baxian, Feng Yuechan, and Giant Armor charged in from 3 directions, causing even more casualties to the Holy Eve spiritual land. Chapter 602. Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan were both 6th Order Cloud River Realm cultivators, but with their profound foundation, the strength they could display was far beyond what an ordinary 6th Order Realm cultivator could compare to. As for Giant Armor, he was a monster. His body was as strong as steel. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan had to avoid the enemy's counterattack when they were fighting, but Giant Armor didn't care at all. He just charged forward and let the enemy's attacks land on his body. His body made loud banging sounds, but they didn't affect him at all. Under normal circumstances, even though the 3 of them were strong, they couldn't possibly be a match for so many enemies. However, the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land were first suppressed by the Forbidden Sky formation, and now they were surrounded by the formation. Coupled with the attacks of the demonic wolves, they panicked and the situation was extremely chaotic, giving the 3 of them room to perform. Break the array, quickly break the array. Huo Liao Yuan's roar resounded through the sky. His eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. As he roared, his entire body burned like a flame. The powerful aura of a 9th Order Realm cultivator swept out in all directions. A huge fireball like the sun appeared in the sky and slammed into the defensive array. Under this attack, the defensive array's light barrier caved in for a moment, and its radiance dimmed a little. Many Holy Eve spiritual land cultivators also attacked at this moment, and the scene became extremely lively. Within the spiritual land, more than 30 Holy Eve spiritual land cultivators had died. As time passed, more cultivators died. Li Baxian and the other 2's figures intertwined with each other, and the wolf pack rushed forward, playing a symphony of death. At this time in the spiritual land, the surviving cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land finally organized a defensive line. More than 30 people had their backs against the light screen of the trapping formation. The body cultivators took out large shields and blocked in front of them, building a human wall to fight against the attacking wolves. But as long as the trapping array wasn't broken, it would be difficult for them to escape. But in such a situation, self-preservation was already the limit, so how could they have the strength to break the array? Their only hope now was for Huo Liao Yuan and the others to break the defensive array and come to their rescue. Hong hong hong. Loud bangs rang out one after another, and the defensive array's light barrier quickly dimmed. Although the second formation was much stronger than the first, it could not withstand the continuous attacks of so many cultivators. After all, it was only a defensive formation that Lu Yi had set up with his own strength. It was already very rare for it to be able to hold on for so long. In the spiritual land, Lu Yi was still standing in place, remotely controlling the operation of the array. A defensive array with a person controlling it was a defensive array, and one without a defensive array was completely different. Although he knew the defensive array wouldn't last long, there was no harm in holding it for a little longer. At this moment, his body suddenly moved to the side, and a short blade almost brushed past his neck and stabbed into the air. A few steps behind him, a figure appeared like a ghost. The ghost cultivator who launched the sneak attack had a shocked expression on his face, as if he did not expect Lu Yi to be able to dodge such a hidden attack. It had to be said that this ghost cultivator was very bold. Even in such a situation, he still wanted to kill Lu Yi. Their main goal this time was to kill Lu Yi. As long as they could kill Lu Yi, the losses they had suffered before would be barely acceptable. However, such a surefire attack had actually failed to succeed. Exposed, the ghost's ghost wanted to retreat, but a fiery red saber light slashed down in front of him, followed by a storm of attacks. Xiao Liang, who was observing in the dark, watched this scene quietly. The corner of his eyes twitched, and he couldn't help but recall the days when he taught Lu Yi in Fox Immortal Valley. He even taught Lu Yi the Heart's Eye secret technique. Although Lu Yi had given him a defensive tattoo, that tattoo was only a temporary tattoo and would lose its effectiveness after a few uses. Compared to what Lu Yi had obtained, how could it be compared to what Lu Yi had obtained? What shocked Xiao Liang even more was that in such a short period of time, Lu Yi had actually reached the entry level of the Heart's Eye secret technique, and from the speed of his reaction, the range of his Heart's Eye was even greater than his own. What kind of freak is he? And, he's a 5th order Cloud River Realm cultivator? Xiao Liang couldn't understand. What kind of elixir did he take to improve his cultivation so quickly? Thinking back to when they first met 2 months ago, this guy was only a 3rd order Cloud River Realm cultivator. Back then he had been chasing after Yang Kai like a stray dog. Back in Fox Immortal Valley he was only a 4th order cultivator, but after not seeing him for a few days, he had actually advanced by another realm. Pwah! The ghost was sent flying with a huge wound on his chest and abdomen. Before he landed, several monster wolves pounced on him, followed by a blood-curdling scream and the sound of flesh being torn apart. This ghost cultivator was the same as Yen Gui, whom Lu Yi had killed before. They were both 7th order Cloud River Realm cultivators, but the 7th order Cloud River Realm cultivator that Lu Yi had to exhaust all his means to kill back then was now nothing in front of him. Gotcha. The sound of cracking could be heard. Cracks appeared on the protective array, and it was on the verge of collapse. Although the ghost's sudden attack didn't do anything to Lu Yi, it restrained him, preventing him from controlling the array. This also allowed the Holy Eve Spirit Land to break the array faster. More and more sounds could be heard until the entire array's light barrier completely collapsed. Save them. Huo Liao Yuan gritted his teeth and roared. Although he couldn't wait to tear Lu Yi into pieces, he wasn't consumed by anger. Instead he gave the correct order. Many cultivators swarmed in and passed through the trapping array's light barrier without any hindrance. They joined up with the surviving cultivators in the Spirit Land. While resisting the attacks of Li Baxian and the others and the wolves, they turned around and bombarded the trapping array's light barrier. The trapping array was much weaker than the protective array. If it weren't for the wolves, the trapped cultivators would have broken it long ago. With the help of their companions, it only took them 30 breaths of time to completely break the trapping array. Separated by a few hundred meters, Lu Yi and Huo Liao Yuan's gazes met. One was calm as water while the other was furious. After a few breaths, Huo Liao Yuan suppressed the anger in his heart and gritted his teeth. Retreat! With this order, the cultivators of the Holy Eve Spirit Land fought and retreated. Soon they were out of the range of the Spirit Land. The wolves didn't chase after them. Within the range of the Spirit Land, there was a sky restriction array. They could still fight with the cultivators. However, once they were out of the Spirit Land, the cultivators could fly. The threat posed by the wolves was greatly reduced. The cultivators fled back in a sorry state, each and every one of them had lingering fears. Some of the more mentally fragile female cultivators even began to cry. Throughout their journey of cultivation they had more or less experienced some dangers, but they had never felt as helpless as they did now. When they were trapped in the Spirit Land, the aura of death was like an invisible beast licking their souls. They were on the verge of collapse. So many senior and junior brothers that they were familiar with died tragically beside them. After today, this battle was destined to be a nightmare that they couldn't escape from for the rest of their lives. Lu Yi, you will die without a doubt. Huo Liao Yuan roared. He clenched his teeth so hard that blood seeped out. He thought that this was an easy task. However, in the end he suffered heavy losses. From start to finish, it had only been 10 minutes. As the decision-maker and guide of this operation, he would definitely be held accountable in the future. Perhaps he would even be punished by the sect. The culprit behind all this was Lu Yi. The hatred in his heart toward Lu Yi was so deep that even the 3 rivers and 5 lakes couldn't wash it away. There was also that sneaky person who secretly leaked the information. He had previously guessed that the person who secretly leaked the information must have suffered a great loss at the hands of Lu Yi. Thus he wanted to kill with a borrowed knife. He had already overestimated the strength of Lu Yi's side based on the information he obtained. Otherwise he wouldn't have brought so many people. However, as soon as he came into contact with Lu Yi, his own side was defeated. Before coming he didn't think that he would encounter such a setback. However, it happened right under his nose. Sky Restriction Array. How could a Cloud River tier set up such a sky restriction array? In the Spirit Land, Lu Yi looked at him calmly. He didn't say a word. There was no smugness of victory. Then he waved the array flag and the concealment array came into effect again. It covered the entire spirit land and disappeared from everyone's sight. This calm response made Huo Liaoyuan even more furious. He was about to explode. Senior Brother Hua. An 8th Order cultivator came to Huo Liaoyuan's side. He had many wounds on his body and there were blood stains on his face. Obviously he had gone through a tough battle. What do we do now? Huo Liaoyuan looked around and saw faces full of lingering fear and panic, as well as the joy of surviving a disaster. He had brought more than 150 people here, but less than 100 were still alive. In other words, more than 60 people had died in the spirit land in the short time it took to drink a cup of tea. Huo Liaoyuan's mouth twitched. His mind was in a mess and he didn't know what to do. With their current strength, if they organized a wave of attacks they might have a chance to kill Lu Ye, but they would definitely suffer more casualties. They had already lost so many people, so how could he dare to lose more? The other side obviously wouldn't counterattack. In the spirit land, the other side had the help of the sky restriction array, which could greatly reduce the strength of the cultivators. This gave the monster wolves the capital to participate in the battle. If they really counterattacked they would only be courting death. In other words, in this situation no matter who it was, the side that took the initiative to attack would suffer. Rest here and wait for reinforcements. After a long while, Huo Liaoyuan's dry lips squeezed out a sentence. Sacred Flame Sect and Universe Sect still had many people they could mobilize, but it would take more time. If 100 people couldn't do it, then 200. If 200 wasn't enough, then 300. No matter what, Lu Ye had to die. After the order was given, the 8th Order cultivator was obviously relieved. He was really afraid that Huo Liaoyuan would do something unwise in his anger. The spirit ship floating in the air slowly descended. The Holy Eve spirit land cultivators were in a sorry state. They set up camp at the entrance of Returning Heaven Valley and began to recuperate. In the dark, Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng were silent. They were hiding here to reap the benefits, but in the end they were watching an unimaginable show. They had mixed feelings. Chapter 603. In less than 10 minutes after the battle at Huitian Valley, Tu Guanxiong received the news from the cultivators of Huanyu sect. After reading it he was shocked. Under the leadership of Huo Liaoyuan, not only did the cultivators of the two sects fail to break through Lu Ye's spirit land, but they also suffered a great loss. Heavy losses. There were 63 dead cultivators, 45 from Sacred Flame sect and 18 from Huanyu sect. It was a simple line of words, but the suffocating smell of blood filled the air. Tu Guanxiong could not believe it and personally sent a message to Huo Liaoyuan to ask. After confirming it he was stunned. How could this be? How could this be? Huo Liaoyuan took away more than 70 cultivators from the Holy Eve spirit land. He gathered about the same number of Sacred Flame sect cultivators. How could there be such heavy losses when they gathered more than 150 people to deal with Lu Ye? So what if the other party could control the wolf pack? After sending another message to a few Huanyu sect cultivators, Tu Guanxiong finally understood the source of the heavy losses. It was the flight restriction array. The Holy Eve spirit land did not have a flight restriction array, but Lu Ye had one? How high was this guy's attainment in the array Dao? The first layer of the defensive formation showed weakness to the enemy, isolating the cultivators of the two sects who rushed into the spiritual land. For a moment they couldn't coordinate with each other. The sudden attack of the forbidden flight formation caught the cultivators of the two sects in the spiritual land off guard. Under the premise that they couldn't fly freely, they had to face the large number of demon wolves. It was naturally difficult for them to do anything. After understanding all this, Tu Guanxiong let out a heavy sigh. Although he was angry at Fire Prairie for not being careful enough, he couldn't blame him for anything. Anyone in Fire Prairie's position would be powerless when faced with such a situation. After thinking for a moment, he could only send a message to Huo Liaoyuan. He told him that he would gather the Huanyu sect disciples who were scattered nearby to help. He told him not to act rashly before his subordinates gathered enough strength. This was also Huo Liaoyuan's plan, so he naturally agreed. A moment later, a large number of cultivators of the two sects received the message and rushed in the direction of Taimang Mountain. However, these cultivators were from different distances. The fastest would take 7 to 8 days to rush over, and the slowest would take 10 to 20 days. They could not be counted on at the moment. In the spiritual land of Huitian Valley, several people were cleaning up the messy battlefield and collecting the spoils of war. Li Baxian and the others were fine, and only a few demon wolves had perished in battle. Compared to the results of the battle, such losses were practically negligible. However, Giant Armor was a little sad. Although the wolves had willingly followed him back then, it had annoyed him to no end. However, after spending so much time together, he had changed his mind. The spiritual land could be placed in Huitian Valley. It was all thanks to the protection of the wolf pack. For the spiritual land, this wolf pack was the most solid shield, not the defensive array set up by Lu Yi. Facts proved that if it weren't for the help of the wolf pack today, no matter how many spirit arrays Lu Yi had set up, it would have been useless. There were only 4 of them in total, so no matter how many enemies they could kill, how many could they kill? Therefore, even though only a few demon wolves had died, Giant Armor was still very sad. In the spiritual land, Li Baxin looked at the entrance of the valley and slowly said, "Little junior brother, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land are stationed at the entrance of the valley. It seems that they are waiting for reinforcements." In today's battle, the Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered huge losses. After realizing that there was a sky-sealing array here, they would definitely not take the initiative to attack again. However, the other side had suffered such a big loss and did not retreat. Instead, they put on a defensive posture as if they were afraid that Lu Yi and the others would run away. They were obviously gathering more people. Once the other side gathered enough helpers, they would definitely storm the spiritual land. "Do you want me to call some people to help?" Li Baxin asked. Lu Yi shook his head. "It's easy to pay 1,000 gold but hard to repay a favor. We should settle our own matters and not trouble others." Although with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's connections, it would not be a problem to call for some helpers, but last time in the hunting ground, when Lu Yi was being chased by many myriad demon ridge powerhouses, Li Baxin had already asked for help. These debts of gratitude were all on Li Baxin's shoulders. If he asked for help again today, the burden would only increase. Hearing what he said, Li Baxin sighed. "That's true." Lu Yi said, "Before today, if we were to escape back to the 9 regions, it wouldn't matter. But after today, if we want to escape back to the 9 regions, the loss is not just a matter of the Pillar of Tianji and the Spring Spirit." Li Baxin was slightly startled, but soon understood what he meant. The few of them could escape back to the 9 regions and get rid of the trouble here, but the wolf pack could not leave. In today's battle, dozens of cultivators from the 2 sects were killed by the wolf pack. Once they left, the anger of the 2 sects' cultivators was bound to be vented on the wolf pack. At that time, how many of the wolf pack could survive? They would probably be wiped out soon. Based on this concern, Giant Armor might not be willing to abandon the wolf pack and return to the 9 regions with them. If Giant Armor did not leave, how could they leave? Compared to the Holy Eve's spiritual land, I am more concerned about another matter. Lu Yi frowned slightly. "What is it?" "Xiaoliang and Tanxing." Lu Yi said the names of the 2. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was able to find the location of the spiritual land so accurately and even dispatched so many people at once. They obviously have some understanding of the situation of our spiritual land. This information could only be leaked by Xiaoliang and Tanxing, but I didn't see the 2 of them today. Moreover, although the Holy Eve's spiritual land has a lot of information, there are 2 things that they are unclear about. First, they don't know that there is a forbidden sky formation in the spiritual land, otherwise they would not have been so careless today. Second, they don't know that we have the Pillar of Tianji. If they knew that there was a Pillar of Tianji in the spiritual land, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land might not have been willing to come all the way here, because even if they really forced Lu Yi into a desperate situation, he could still use the Pillar of Tianji to return to the 9 regions. So, the information that Xiaoliang and Tanxing revealed was somewhat reserved. Lu Yi nodded. Hiding the existence of the Pillar of Tianji is nothing more than to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, waiting for an opportunity to reap the benefits. As for not revealing the forbidden sky formation, it is probably to intensify the hatred. In that case, these 2 people must be hiding in the dark. How sinister. As he spoke, Lu Yi stood up. "Senior brother, I'm going to scout out their location. At the very least, we have to make these hidden enemies appear on the surface. We can't let these 2 dogs spy on us in the dark." Li Baxin hurriedly stopped him. "It's too dangerous. If we continue to wait, we will only be sitting ducks. Don't worry, senior brother, I am confident. If we fight, I am definitely not their match, but it will not be that easy for them to kill me." "Then I will go with you." Lu Yi laughed. "Senior brother, don't you know what kind of abilities I have? If you go with me, I won't be able to use those methods." Li Baxin still wanted to say something, but Feng Yuechan, who had been standing silently at the side, tugged at his sleeve and said, "Junior brother Lu is right. If we continue to wait, we will only be sitting ducks. We still have to think of a way to break out of this situation. Junior brother Lu has the means of a ghost cultivator, senior brother, You will only cause trouble if you go with him. Li Baxin frowned and did not say anything. Feng Yuechan took out a small umbrella. Junior brother Lu, if you insist on going alone, then refine this and take it with you. Otherwise your senior brother and I will not agree. Lu Yi looked at the small umbrella. Although he did not know what kind of power it had, it must have extremely strong defensive power since Feng Yuechan took it out at this time. He did not refuse Feng Yuechan's good intentions. He took the small umbrella and silently sensed it. To his surprise, he found that it was actually a magic tool. Cloud River tier cultivators naturally could not activate the full power of magic tools, just like how Yi could not activate the full power of the nine-front formation. Her strength was not enough and she had not reached that level. Moreover, forcefully activating this thing would definitely consume a lot of energy. However, with this thing in hand he would at least have some life-saving means. However, if he wanted to unleash its power he would still have to refine it. Lu Yi immediately activated his spiritual power to refine it. With the cooperation of the original owner, Feng Yuechan, it was not difficult. After he finished refining it, Lu Yi found out that this small umbrella not only had extremely strong defensive power, but it also had the ability to hide one's aura. However, when it was activated, it could not be moved, which was similar to the disappearance bracelet that Lu Yi had previously obtained. This effect was not very useful to Lu Yi. He could construct concealment and aura concealment spiritual tattoos. With the support of these two spiritual tattoos, his concealment ability was stronger than ordinary ghost cultivators. There was no need to rely on external objects. At this time the moon was high in the sky and it was late at night. It was a good time to act. Lu Yi walked straight to a corner of the house, where there was a transportation formation that had been set up a few days ago. The people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had set up camp at the entrance of the valley. They would definitely be on guard against the situation at the spiritual land, and there would be people monitoring the movements here at all times. However, the spiritual land was covered by a concealment formation, and they could not see the situation inside. If Lu Yi walked out from inside, it would definitely affect the concealment formation, and some traces would be exposed. If he directly teleported out, he would not have to worry about this problem. Standing on the transportation formation, Lu Ye's mind connected to the location of the other transportation points. Li Baxin was still worried and warned, "Little junior brother, you must be careful." Lu Yi nodded, and the space around him distorted slightly, and his figure disappeared. In a mountain more than 200 miles away from Huitian spiritual land, there was a hidden cave. Suddenly, there was a surge of spiritual power in the cave, and Lu Ye's figure appeared. He immediately sensed the surroundings and did not detect any aura of life. Only then did he walk out of the cave. He did not take out a spiritual weapon to avoid leaving too obvious traces. Urging his spiritual power, he flew into the air and flew straight in the direction of Huitian Valley. Previously, the wolf pack went out to hunt every few days, which led to few monsters within 1,000 miles of Huitian Valley. This made it convenient for Lu Yi to move at this moment. Otherwise, if he encountered a few monsters on the way, it would only be troublesome. But even so, he did not fly too high and only flew out about 10 feet above the ground. It was not until he was about 30 to 50 miles away from Huitian Valley that Lu Yi landed and completely disappeared with the help of aura concealment. Chapter 604. Lu Yi speculated that since Tan Sheng and Xiao Liang were hiding in the dark, they should not be too far away from returning Heaven Valley. They could be anywhere from 10 to 30 kilometers away. Moreover, they had to avoid the cultivators of the two sects from the Holy Eve Spirit Land, so they definitely would not be near the entrance of Returning Heaven Valley. Returning Heaven Valley was surrounded by mountains on three sides, especially the back, where there was a rugged cliff that was not suitable for hiding. There were only two sides left for Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng to choose from. This made it easier for Lu Yi to search. However, under the premise of concealing himself, Lu Ye's movements were not fast, so even if he had a rough location, it would not be easy to find the two. Fortunately, Lu Ye's luck had always been good. In less than 2 hours, Lu Yi sensed the aura of life nearby. This place was only 10 kilometers away from Returning Heaven Valley, which was within his range of judgment. He quietly crept forward and soon, under the moonlight, he found two figures sitting cross-legged under a tree. Taking a closer look, who else could it be but Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng? Lu Yi did not continue to approach. These two were both Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivators, especially Xiao Liang, who had sharp senses. If he got too close, he was afraid that they would notice him. After confirming their location, Lu Yi left silently. Xiao Liang, who was meditating, suddenly opened his eyes and looked around. He frowned slightly. Just now, he had an inexplicable feeling that he was being spied on. However, after careful investigation, there was no one around. So, he just took it as an illusion and didn't pay attention to it. At the entrance of returning Heaven Valley, the cultivators of the two sects gathered in groups of 3 to 5. The atmosphere was a little gloomy, and many female cultivators were secretly sobbing. What happened during the day was like a nightmare for all of them. Under the leadership of Huoliao Yuan, they came aggressively, but in just a cup of tea's time, more than 60 of them died in returning Heaven Valley. The lingering fear made them feel cold, and only the flickering bonfire in front of them brought a little negligible warmth. Some were angry, gritting their teeth and shouting that they must kill Lu Yi to avenge their dead companions. At this moment, it was the darkest before dawn. A short scream pierced through the night sky, instantly alarming everyone. "What's the matter?" Huoliao Yuan arrived in a flash. When he looked over, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. 2 figures were lying in a pool of blood on the ground. One of them was still alive, but he didn't look like he would live for much longer. Lu Yi. That person clutched at his throat, blood spurting out from the gaps between his fingers. He raised his hand and grabbed in the direction of Fire Prairie, his eyes filled with desire. "Senior brother Hua save, ugh." Huoliao Yuan raised his head abruptly and saw a fiery red stream of light flying away in the night sky. He was furious. His figure shot up into the sky and chased in that direction, quickly closing the distance between them. Anger and killing intent filled his heart, and he didn't notice that Lu Yi wasn't heading towards Huitian Valley. Logically speaking, the safest way for Lu Yi to kill someone was to escape back to Huitian Valley. Once he escaped back to Huitian Valley, the cultivators of the two sects wouldn't be able to do anything to him, no matter how powerful they were. However, he didn't fly in the direction of Huitian Valley. Instead, he chose another direction. That direction was where Tan Sheng and Xiao Liang were hiding. Feeling the movement behind him, Lu Yi looked back and frowned. A 9th order cultivator was indeed a 9th order cultivator. His speed was ridiculously fast. Although his cultivation had increased by 2 minor realms recently, and his flying speed was much faster than when he was in the hunting ground. He was also faster than an average 5th order cultivator, but he was still far from a 9th order cultivator. Fortunately, he still had wind travel. With the support of the wind travel spirit tattoo, the spirit energy river in his body flowed rapidly, and his speed rose sharply. Even so, the distance between them was still closing. A wind travel spirit tattoo alone wasn't enough to let him escape the pursuit of a 9th order cultivator, but if he used his flight wings, his speed would increase even more. He should be able to catch up to Fire Prairie. However, he didn't want to escape from Fire Prairie, so he didn't use his flight wings. Tan Sheng and Xiao Liang were still meditating. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking through the air came from afar. Both of them were alarmed and raised their heads to look. In the air, 2 streams of light were rushing towards them, one in front and one behind. The 2 streams of light looked like burning flames. This is... Tan Sheng didn't realize what was going on for a moment. He only vaguely felt that the figure in the stream of light in front of him was somewhat familiar. In the blink of an eye, the stream of light arrived in front of them. "Lu Yi!" Xiao Liang exclaimed in a low voice. He was stunned for a moment. Why was Lu Yi not hiding in the spirit land? Why did he come out? And from the looks of it, it seemed like he was being chased. Just when Xiao Liang instinctively wanted to stop them, Lu Yi, who was flying over their heads, suddenly raised his hand and sent out a fire phoenix technique towards the 2 of them. At the same time, he shouted in a low voice, "I'll leave it to you." As soon as he finished speaking, he flashed past. Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng didn't know what was going on, but how could they miss such a heaven-sent opportunity? They easily blocked the fire phoenix technique and flew up into the air. However, before they could chase after Lu Yi, Fire Prairie, who was right behind him, activated a violent spell to attack the 2 of them. Huoliao Yuan had chased them all the way here and was filled with anger. He only wanted to kill Lu Yi to vent the hatred in his heart, but the sudden appearance of 2 9th order masters was like a bucket of cold water that poured over his heart. Coupled with Lu Yi's previous words, the anger in his heart instantly dissipated, leaving only panic and panic. He was afraid that he had fallen into Lu Yi's trap. This bastard had somehow found 2 powerful helpers to ambush him here and then lured him here. He didn't have any helpers around him right now, so he was afraid he would die here. Because of this worry, how could he dare to hold back? Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng, who were about to chase after Lu Yi, were immediately stunned and could only fight back. For a time, the three figures fought fiercely in midair. In just a moment, Xiaoliang vaguely realized. It turned out that the feeling of being spied on was not an illusion. Lu Ye had indeed been here, otherwise he wouldn't have known where he and Tan Xing were hiding and even lured Huoliao Yuan here. Is he trying to kill with a borrowed knife? Or does he simply not want me and Tan Xing to hide in the dark? It's very likely the latter. Stop! Xiaoliang shouted angrily as he slashed out with his sword. At the same time he stopped and retreated to show his sincerity. Tan Xing immediately came to his side. A few dozen meters away, Huoliao Yuan looked calm on the surface, but his heart was filled with shock because the two Ninth Order masters he was fighting were each stronger than the other. With the two of them working together, he couldn't compete at all. In that short period of time, he almost thought that he was going to die, but he didn't expect the other party to stop first. And the saber-wielding weapon cultivator? Wild Saber Sect? Huoliao Yuan recalled the Ninth Order cultivator of this generation of Wild Saber Sect and blurted out a name. You're Xiaoliang? Xiaoliang's face was cold and he didn't speak. No one would be in a good mood after being schemed against like this. What's more, he and Tan Xing had originally planned to hide in the dark, but now, with Lu Ye's interference, their existence was exposed. Silence was a tacit agreement. Huoliao Yuan relaxed. Fortunately, Xiaoliang is from Wild Saber Sect and Wild Saber Sect is from Myriad Demon Ridge. It's good that he's not an enemy. This fellow Taoist is. Huoliao Yuan looked at Tan Xing. Tan Xing cupped his fists helplessly. Tan Xing from New Moon Sect. Huoliao Yuan returned the greeting. Huoliao Yuan from Sacred Flame Sect. He then asked, why are you two fellow Taoists here? As soon as he spoke, he suddenly realized something. His originally kind expression changed slightly, and his eyes narrowed. There was no reason for two Ninth Order cultivators to hide here for no reason, especially when a battle broke out here during the day. Moreover, he heard that the operation against Lu Ye in the hunting ground was led by these two. In the end, Lu Ye killed his way into the Spirit Stream battlefield, destroyed New Moon Sect's encampment, and extorted a lot of benefits from Wild Saber Sect. These two had a great grudge with Lu Ye to begin with. Tan Xing turned to look at Xiaoliang, but the other party said calmly, I was just passing by. Who was fellow Taoist were chasing just now? Tan Xing was convinced. To be able to say these words without changing his expression, he was definitely not as good as him. I was just passing by. Huoliao Yuan clenched his fists, and the flesh on his face trembled. It was obvious that he was suppressing the anger in his heart. How could he, who had vaguely seen through the truth, not know that the reason why the disciples of the two sects had suffered so much this time was because he had underestimated the enemy, but the main reason was that these two had concealed some important information. If he had known that there was a space sealing array in Lu Ye's spirit land, how could he have let the disciples of the two sects rush in? He had always been curious as to who had passed on the information to him. Now he finally understood. They must have been secretly observing during the day, but now they were pretending not to know. Huoliao Yuan wanted to throw a big fireball at Xiaoliang's face to see how thick his skin was, but he could only suppress the anger in his heart. Not to mention that Sacred Flame Sect was a 4th-grade sect and couldn't afford to offend Wild Saber Sect. Now was not the time to fall out with these two. Since he couldn't beat them, what could he do? The person I was chasing was Lu Ye. When Huoliao Yuan said this, he had already calmed down. Oh, Lu Ye. Xiaoliang raised his eyebrows as if he had just found out. The Lu Ye from Jade Blood Sect? What bullshit are you asking? Huoliao Yuan's suppressed anger almost surged up again. That's right. That's truly a coincidence. Brother Tan and I were searching for his whereabouts as well. Never had we imagined that he would actually be right under our noses. This is truly a case of searching high and low for something, yet finding it without any effort. Ha ha ha. Huoliao Yuan gave a fake smile. Tan Xing said, fellow Taoist Hua, we were used by Lu Ye just now and he was lucky enough to escape. Fellow Taoist Hua, please forgive us. Chapter 605. I wouldn't dare. Huoliao Yuan replied through gritted teeth. Suddenly, a fluctuation of spirit energy came from afar. Huoliao Yuan turned his head and found that the source of the movement was the Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators' encampment. Not good. Huoliao Yuan shouted and immediately realized what had happened. Lu Ye had taken advantage of the time when he was busy with Xiaoliang and Tan Xing to go around and kill his way back. He didn't have time to say anything to Xiaoliang and Tan Xing. He turned around and rushed towards the entrance of returning Sky Valley. Xiaoliang and Tan Xing looked at each other and Xiaoliang said, let's go and take a look. Since they had been exposed, there was no need to hide anymore. At the entrance of returning Sky Valley, Huo Liaoyuan hurried back and found that 2 more disciples had been killed and lying in a pool of blood. "Where are they?" Huo Liaoyuan asked. A Sacred Flame sect disciple replied, "They escaped." Huo Liaoyuan's blood boiled. He had nowhere to vent his anger. At the same time he was puzzled. Wuxia was a weapon cultivator. How could he use the means of a ghost cultivator? Even with the help of a spirit talisman, he shouldn't have been able to appear and disappear so mysteriously. The other party had attacked twice and 5 cultivators had died. Although the losses were negligible compared to the losses during the day, this kind of enemy hiding in the dark was the most terrifying. Initially, he wanted to stay here and wait for his side to gather enough manpower before attacking the spiritual land. However, that would take time. If they continued to wait, their losses would only be greater. When the time came, they might lose more people than they had gathered. Retreating from here was a good choice, but where could they retreat to? Moreover, if they retreated, who knew if Wuxia would escape? If they missed this opportunity, they might not have such a good opportunity again. Feeling the anxious atmosphere, Huo Liaoyuan knew that he had to end the battle quickly if he wanted to take down Wuxia. He turned to look at Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng and said with a serious expression, "Fellow Taoists, how about joining forces?" Of course, Yang Kai hated these two, but in the current situation he needed to borrow their strength. The strength of 2 Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators could not be underestimated. If he could borrow their strength, he might have a chance to succeed. Xiao Liang pondered for a moment and said, "Joining forces is not a problem. However, if the other party hides in the spiritual land, what can we do even if we join forces? Unless fellow Taoist Hua is willing to attack by force. However, I believe that fellow Taoist Hua is unwilling to take this step, right?" Although the Holy Eve spiritual land had suffered heavy losses, it did not mean that they did not have the capital to attack. However, even if they could take down Lu Yi, they would still suffer heavy losses. Xiao Liang did not think that the Fire Prairie would lose their minds to such an extent. Huo Liaoyuan said indifferently, "How can you be so sure that I won't attack by force?" Xiao Liang's expression couldn't help but change as he looked at Huo Liaoyuan in surprise, but he couldn't tell what he was thinking. Huo Liaoyuan looked in the direction of the Spirit Land and said indifferently, "After dawn, we'll attack Huitian Valley. At that time we'll need your help. After we're done, I'll give you 20% of the bounty on Wuxia." This time, not only was Xiao Liang surprised, even Tan Sheng was confused. Huo Liaoyuan was obviously very confident in taking down Wuxia. However, if they attacked by force, both sides would suffer heavy losses. Was Huo Liaoyuan really willing to do this? 40%. Xiao Liang couldn't understand, but it didn't stop him from bargaining. Huo Liaoyuan shook his head and said, "Fellow Taoist Xia, you must be joking. Although the 2 of you are strong, to me you're just icing on the cake. Even without your help, Wuxia will definitely die. I'm willing to give you 20% of the bounty just to reduce the Holy Eve spiritual land's losses. If the 2 of you aren't willing to join forces, I won't force you." He acted as if he had Lu Yi under his control, which confused Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng. After a moment of silence, Xiao Liang said, "Fellow Taoist Hua, you might not know this, but there's actually a divine pillar in Wuxia's spiritual land." He had never revealed this information before. During the battle during the day, the location of the divine pillar was also concealed, so the cultivators of the 2 sects did not notice it. Huo Liaoyuan was surprised. "Are you sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes." Xiao Liang nodded. "So no matter what plans you have, if you really want to kill him, you must seize the location of the divine pillar as soon as possible. You must not let Wuxia get close." "I understand. I'll arrange this matter later." Huo Liaoyuan nodded. Xiao Liang looked at him deeply and said, "It's good that you know what to do." After a few simple sentences, they confirmed the matter of joining forces. Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng found a secluded place to meditate. Huo Liaoyuan also gave the order to attack Huitian Valley after daybreak. Although the cultivators of the 2 sects had yet to recover from the trauma of the previous battle, they began to sharpen their weapons and secretly prepare. Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng held back for a long time. Tan Sheng couldn't help but ask softly, "Brother Xia, do you really think that Huo Liaoyuan will attack Wuxia's spiritual land?" Since he said so, it must be true. Tan Sheng shook his head slightly. "Although this is the first time we've met, Huo Liaoyuan is a scheming person. The Holy Eve spiritual land has already suffered great losses. If we attack forcefully, even if we take down Wuxia, the losses will outweigh the gains. Why would such a person make such a decision? He's even willing to share 20% of the profits with us. Brother Xiao, we should be careful. Well, Liao Yuan isn't very friendly to us. Xiao Liang nodded. I know. We'll act according to the situation tomorrow. But I'm concerned about something else. What is it? Well, Liao Yuan didn't ask me about the location of Lu Ye's divine pillar. Xiao Liang was confused. His decision to reveal the Tianji pillar to the Fire Prairie was naturally not out of kindness. Instead, he was afraid that the Fire Prairie would push Lu Yi too far and force him to leave. At that time, all his efforts would be for naught. However, Liao Yuan was surprised when he heard the news, but he didn't ask anything else. This was obviously abnormal. It was as if the existence of the divine pillar didn't interfere with his plan at all. Therefore, there was no need to ask about it in detail. Tan Sheng recalled their conversation and quickly realized this. He frowned and said, "What is he trying to do?" "No matter what he's trying to do, we'll know in the morning." It wasn't far from dawn. More than 2 hours later, the sky gradually brightened. Under Liao Yuan's command, the cultivators of the two sects who were already prepared launched an attack on the spiritual land. In an instant, the concealment formation lost its effect and the scenery of the spiritual land was imprinted in their vision. There was no defensive formation to obstruct them because Lu Yi didn't set it up. Lu Yi flashed out of the spiritual land and frowned when he saw nearly 100 cultivators approaching the edge of the spiritual land. Was this a forceful attack? No matter how angry Liao Yuan was, he wouldn't make such a stupid decision, right? Did he not care about the lives of his subordinates? Or was it that his 2 sneak attacks yesterday made him so angry that he lost his mind? However, looking at the opponent's orderly formation, it didn't seem to be the case. Li Baxian, Feng Yuechan, and Giant Armor appeared together and stood beside Lu Yi. Little junior brother. The situation isn't good this time. Lu Ye's expression was solemn. He saw Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng's figures in the opponent's camp. This was within his expectations. Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng, who were hiding in the dark, were forced out by him. The best choice was naturally to join forces with the Holy Eve's spiritual land. It seemed to strengthen the enemy's strength, but in fact, the vipers hiding in the dark were the most terrifying. Now that they were in the open, the threat level was reduced by a lot. Lu Yi turned to look at Giant Armor. If we can't stop them, use the Tianji pillar to escape back to the 9 states, understand? He wasn't worried about Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan. They would definitely run if the situation was not right. He was only worried about Giant Armor. After a few demon wolves died yesterday, Giant Armor was immersed in a sorrowful atmosphere for the entire day. He might not be willing to abandon the wolf pack and escape. Giant Armor glanced at the nearby demon wolves and remained silent. If you die, you'll lose everything. If you live, you can still take revenge. Lu Yi persuaded earnestly. Giant Armor lowered his head and remained silent. Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh and stopped persuading him. Kill? Outside the spiritual land, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land stepped into the area covered by the air-sealing spell formation along with Liao Yuan's angry roar. After what happened yesterday, they naturally couldn't fly in the air. The returning heaven spiritual land was a small spiritual land and didn't occupy a large area. However, in order to take care of the wolf pack, Lu Yi set up a large array. Whether it was the concealment array, the protection array, or the air-sealing spell formation, they were all far larger than the spiritual land itself. They covered a radius of a few hundred feet. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land stepped into the edge of the array. They were still a few hundred feet away from Lu Yi and the others. This distance was naturally not within the attack range. Many cultivators marched forward in unison, pressuring the spiritual land. Everyone's spiritual energy was surging, ready to strike at any moment. The wolf pack also moved. They bared their teeth and the demon energy around them surged. A great battle was about to break out. It wasn't until they were less than 100 feet away that the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land attacked together under Liao Yuan's command. In an instant, the light of imperial equipment and spells bloomed and surged toward the wolf pack. At the same time, the wolf pack also counterattacked with wind blades. However, they were much fewer in number than the cultivators. After all, there weren't many demon wolves that could use this demonic technique. The wolf pack was undoubtedly at a disadvantage in such a long-distance battle. The head wolf clearly understood this and howled toward the sky. In the next moment, the wolf pack rushed forward. Wolf howls echoed from afar as snow-white figures dashed forward. The distance of 100 feet was quickly closed. Some of the demon wolves were hit by spells or imperial equipment, causing them to stagger. However, the demon wolves were strong and had demon essence to protect their bodies. As long as the demon essence was not broken, their lives would not be in danger. Giant Armor's burly figure was mixed in with the wolf pack. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan followed closely behind the wolf pack. 100 swords flew and spells buzzed, showing off their powerful foundation. Only Lu Yi remained in the same place. He only activated the 9 Imperial equipment on his waist to relieve the pressure of the wolf pack. The battle erupted and the scene instantly became lively. Chapter 606. Withstanding the attacks of numerous Imperial equipment and spells, leaving a trail of blood along the way, the demon wolves pounced in front of the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. They leapt high into the air, and their sharp fangs and claws flickered with cold light. The Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators had already prepared for this. The body cultivators and weapon cultivators blocked the monster wolves at the front, while the spirit cultivators and ghost cultivators took advantage of the situation to counterattack. The howls and roars of the wolves merged together. The number of demon wolves was more than twice that of the cultivators from the Holy Eve's spiritual land. However, even though they were all demon generals, the techniques they could use were not as rich as the cultivators, so the situation was in a deadlock for a while. The monster wolves were unable to break through the defensive line organized by the cultivators, and the cultivators were unable to take another step forward. Standing in the spiritual land, Lu Yi controlled his imperial equipment while observing the battlefield. He saw the giant armor roaring, attracting the attention of many cultivators. Many attacks landed on him, making banging sounds. The spirit light on his body flickered wildly, and many cultivators exclaimed in surprise. They probably did not expect that there would be someone in this world with such a strong physique. He saw Xiao Liang and Tan Xing mixed in with the Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators, constantly attacking. With just the two of them, the defense of that area was impregnable. These two were obviously holding back. If 2 Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivators went all out, it would be enough to cause a lot of trouble for the monster wolves in front of them. However, although the monster wolves in front of them were constantly pushed back, they quickly surged forward. It was understandable. With so many people from the Holy Eve's spiritual land mobilizing, if the two of them did not hold back, how could they pull chestnuts out of the fire? From the looks of it, their cooperation with the Holy Eve's spiritual land was only superficial. Everything seemed normal, but everything was so abnormal. Search. This battle had erupted too hastily. If Fire Prairie really wanted to attack the spiritual land, yesterday would have been the best opportunity. They should not have dragged it out until today. So many of them had died yesterday. Although the death of their companions would cause many cultivators to panic, it would also trigger their hatred and anger to the greatest extent. If the Fire Prairie had given the order to attack yesterday, they would not have been able to keep the spiritual land. A night of rest would not allow the Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators to gain more strength. On the contrary, it would make them worry about gains and losses. Why did Fire Prairie attack? Just because of his actions last night? Or was it because of Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng's help? Lu Yi didn't quite understand. Although the battle was intense, there were very few casualties, be it cultivators or demon wolves. This was because even though the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had taken the initiative to attack, they had assumed a defensive posture. As such, the casualties were naturally not that great. This was clearly an order given by the Fire Prairie in advance. Looking at the current situation, it seemed that the Holy Eve's spiritual land would win as long as they could withstand the demon wolf's counterattack. This was completely contrary to their offensive strategy. If they really wanted to attack, they should have disregarded all losses and charged into the spiritual land. They would have killed every wolf they saw and killed every person they saw. They would have slaughtered every single person they saw and turned the spiritual land upside down. They should not have defended their camp so tightly that it was impenetrable. Moreover, from the beginning of the battle, Lu Yi had felt an aura firmly locking onto him. That was the aura of the Fire Prairie. Fire Prairie's eyes burned with fury as he roared, "Lu Yi, get over here and accept your death." He looked as if his mind had been twisted by hatred. Lu Yi ignored his words. While controlling his 9 Dao Imperial equipment, he raised his hand and an array flag appeared in his hand. If not for the fact that he had to control the array, he would have charged over with his saber. Why would he just stand there and do nothing? The protective array and trap array of the spiritual land had been broken. He didn't set it up again because it was meaningless. However, it didn't mean that there were no other arrays in the spiritual land. The moment he saw the array flag in Lu Ye's hand, Fire Prairie's expression changed. He shouted, "Be careful." As he said that, Lu Yi waved the array flag in his hand. A loud explosion accompanied by flames shot into the sky, followed by screams. Huoliao Yuan immediately turned his head to look and saw that a hole had been torn in the front line where his own cultivators were. Around the hole, 7 or 8 cultivators were covered in blood. Although they didn't die, their ears were ringing and they were in a sorry state. The demon wolf in this position took advantage of the situation and killed several people in an instant. Another loud explosion was heard. On the other side, another array was activated. Several people were trapped in the array and met with misfortune. Block it. Don't let them rush over. Junior brother Yun. Senior brother, save me. The scene was in chaos. The sudden eruption of the 2 explosion magical matrices caused everyone from the Holy Eve's spiritual land to tremble. Even though they already knew that they would have to pay a price for forcefully attacking, when the price was right before their eyes, it was still so difficult to accept. Sharp claws pierced through their chests and sharp teeth tore through their flesh. Screams were heard one after another. Fortunately, the Holy Eve's spiritual land maintained a defensive posture. Therefore, after a short period of panic, the 2 holes in the defensive line were quickly filled up by the nearby cultivators and stabilized. However, the dead cultivators couldn't be revived. Moreover, the explosion of the 2 explosion arrays had left a shadow in everyone's heart. Would the next array be on their side? What made them feel slightly relieved was that there were no more explosion arrays. Although Lu Yi had set up a large number of active arrays in the spiritual land, they were scattered everywhere. There weren't many arrays where the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were. He didn't activate all of them at once. Instead, he left a few behind so that he could create a greater deterrent at the right time. Lu Yi, I'm going to kill you. Huoliao Yuan roared as if he had gone mad. At the same time, Lu Yi felt the aura locked on him become stronger. Brother Xia, Huoliao Yuan's condition isn't right, Tanxing said softly to Xia Liang while blocking the monster wolves in front of him. After all, he was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator and the leader of this operation. He shouldn't be acting like this. He should have known that a strong attack would result in huge losses. Although the Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered some losses, they weren't that big. Huoliao Yuan's reaction was obviously a little exaggerated. I see. Xia Liang, on the other hand, replied incoherently, and a look of sudden realization appeared on his face. Tanxing? Xia Liang said in a deep voice, it seems that I have underestimated Huoliao Yuan. This time Lu Yi will definitely die. What a pity. He wasn't regretting Lu Ye's death, but that after Lu Yi died, he and Tanxing would only get 20% of the bounty. After splitting it, each of them would get 10%. No wonder Huoliao Yuan said that their help was just icing on the cake. If Huoliao Yuan had such a thing, he and Tanxing would really be just icing on the cake. He was willing to share 20% of the bounty not because of their help, but because he couldn't afford to offend the Wild Blade sect. Lu Ye's bounty couldn't be taken all by himself, so he used 20% to form a good relationship. In other words, Huoliao Yuan felt a sense of crisis after he and Tanxing were exposed. Or maybe it was because of Lu Ye's attack last night that he chose to attack the Holy Land today. Brother Xia, what are you talking about? Tanxing was confused. How could Lu Yi be dead for sure? You'll know when you see. Xia Liang didn't explain too much because it wouldn't take long for everything to appear in front of them. It would be a waste of time to explain, but he didn't forget to remind Tanxing, remember to escape in time. Tanxing was even more confused, but he suppressed his doubts and silently made his move. The battle was still in full swing. Although the Holy Eve's spiritual land had lost more than 10 people due to the explosion of the 2 explosion arrays, the remaining cultivators still held the line and didn't let the wolves break through. Huoliao Yuan's expression became more and more twisted with anger. Flames surged around his body, making him look like he was burning. Lu Yi suddenly had a feeling that something wasn't quite right. The aura that Huoliao Yuan had locked onto him was too strong. At the beginning of the battle, this aura had locked onto him, but Lu Yi didn't care. Huoliao Yuan had suffered a great loss at his hands, and so many cultivators had died. It was normal for him to keep an eye on him during the battle. After that, the aura kept increasing, and Lu Yi just thought it was caused by his anger. But now, how could the aura of a 9th Order Cloud River Realm cultivator be so strong? Lu Yi even had the feeling that he was being bound by an invisible force, and as time passed, that feeling became clearer and clearer. He raised his eyes and looked at Huoliao Yuan and saw him staring at him. Their eyes met, and Huoliao Yuan was still shouting, Lu Yi, I'll kill you, as if he had gone crazy, but his eyes were clear. And from the beginning to the end, he was only shouting, and didn't take the initiative to attack. Shit. Lu Ye's heart thumped. He didn't know what Huo Liao Yuan was doing, but he was sure that he had fallen into some kind of trap. Huo Liao Yuan's continuous shouting suddenly stopped at this moment, and Lu Yi was shocked to find that he couldn't move. An invisible force was binding him and he was firmly locked in place. Huo Liao Yuan smiled as if his scheme had succeeded. He looked over calmly, "Lu Yi, come and die." As soon as he finished speaking, an object slowly floated up from his hand, emitting a brilliant light. In an instant, everyone's attention was attracted to that object. It was a square object the size of a child's palm, and there was a big word engraved on the front, "Die." On the back there was also a big word, "Fight." As soon as this object appeared, two rays of light shot out, one landing on Lu Yi and the other on Huo Liao Yuan, and like two ropes they firmly bound the two. Li Baxin, who was fighting on his sword, was shocked and exclaimed, "The death arena." As soon as he said that, 100 flying swords flew into the air, and attacked the palm-sized death arena. Feng Yuechan's expression also changed, and she moved to help. But whether it was Li Baxin's flying swords or Feng Yuechan's spells, they couldn't damage the death arena at all. Not to mention the death arena, even Lu Yi and Huo Liao Yuan, who were trapped by the death arena, were unharmed. Chapter 607. Deathmatch Arena. Tan Xing, who was defending against the demon wolves, exclaimed as he looked at the glowing object, "I see. No wonder Fire Prairie was behaving so strangely today. It turned out that they were going to use this object." Everything made sense now. It was the Holy Eve's spiritual land who had launched the attack, but they had been defending passively. Fire Prairie looked like he had lost his mind, but he was only shouting and did not do anything stupid. Everything was a facade to pave the way for this moment. Indeed. Xiao Liang muttered softly. The truth was as he had guessed. Fire Prairie really did have a deathmatch arena. He was able to sense it because Fire Prairie was behaving strangely. Secondly, the aura he had locked onto Lu Yi was too abnormal. It was not Fire Prairie's aura, but the aura that extended from the deathmatch arena. That was why it exceeded Fire Prairie's limit. There were many unique treasures in the 9 regions. These unique treasures had all kinds of strange effects. The tracking disc that Tan Xing used to track Lu Ye's whereabouts was a unique treasure. The golden body token that Lu Yi used to save his life was also a unique treasure. The deathmatch arena was also a unique treasure. It only had one use, which was to lure the user who activated the deathmatch arena and the enemy who was targeted by the deathmatch arena into a deathmatch arena. In terms of value, this object could not be compared to the golden body token that Lu Yi used before. After all, it was a good item that could save one's life. The deathmatch arena was not used to save one's life, but to force the enemy to fight to the death. Therefore, it had a lot of limitations. It had to ensure that the enemy was weaker than the user. Furthermore, there was a prerequisite to using it. The aura extended from the deathmatch arena had to completely lock onto the enemy. In other words, Fire Prairie could not be too far away from Lu Yi. Furthermore, it needed some time to accumulate power. If Lu Yi exceeded a certain distance from Fire Prairie, the deathmatch arena would not be able to activate its effect. This was also the reason why Fire Prairie decided to launch the attack today. It was also the reason why he did not ask Xiao Liang about the location of the Tianji pillar. It did not matter if there was a Tianji pillar or not. As long as he successfully activated the deathmatch arena, Lu Yi would definitely die. All of his previous actions had been a disguise, all in order to make Lu Yi lower his guard. But now it seemed that his plan had been successful. Lu Yi hadn't realized the impending crisis until the very last moment. However, it was already too late. When the 2 beams of light from the deathmatch arena locked onto him and Huo Liao Yuan, the power of this treasure was completely unleashed. Li Baxin's flying swords and Feng Yuechan's spells continued to bombard the deathmatch stage, but the small stage remained unmoved. Lu Ye's and Huo Liao Yuan's figures, along with the small deathmatch arena, disappeared in a flash of light. "Junior brother?" Li Baxin cried out in alarm. He couldn't stop Lu Ye's fate at all. "Let's go." Xiao Liang bellowed and quickly retreated. Tan Xing, who had been warned by him, followed closely behind. At the same time, all the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were fighting and retreating in an orderly manner. Although Li Baxin and the other 2 were furious and chased after them with the wolf pack, the results were minimal. They could only watch as the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land retreated out of the range of the Forbidden Sky formation. Then they all rose into the sky and ran away. The wolves chased them to the edge of the spiritual land, howling one after another, but no longer moved forward. They could still fight with the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land within the range of the space-restricting array, but once they left the range of the space-restricting array, they would become living targets. Although Li Baxian was angry and worried, he still had reason. He stopped chasing and immediately checked Lu Ye's battle imprint. In the current situation, Lu Yi and Huo Liaoyuan had been drawn into the space created by the deathmatch arena. Even if he had 1,000 methods, he couldn't help. He could only determine whether Lu Yi was dead or alive through his battle imprint. "Senior brother?" Feng Yuechan leaned over and called out softly, comforting him. "Senior brother is fine. Senior brother, have you forgotten? In the hunting ground, junior brother Lu killed a 7th order when he was just a 3rd order. Now he's already a 5th order." Although that battle wasn't a result of Lu Ye's efforts alone and the three of them had done their best, Li Baxian's eyes still shone with hope when he heard Feng Yuechan's words. He nodded repeatedly. "Yes, little junior brother is fine. As long as he can activate his final trump card." At this point, his face turned ugly again. He looked up at Feng Yuechan and his eyes lost focus. "Hu Pe is sleeping." Lu Ye's trump card needed to be paired with Hu Pe, but ever since Hu Pe had swallowed an overlord-ranked Yao core, it had been in a deep slumber and had yet to awaken. Not only was it in a deep slumber, even Yi had fallen into a deep slumber. In other words, the current Lu Yi had no external help at all. He was alone, facing an opponent whose cultivation was 4 minor realms higher than him. Li Baxian's figure became unstable and he couldn't help but stagger, his face suddenly turning pale. The space in the death arena was about 3,000 meters in length and width. The sky was empty and there were barriers all around. It wasn't that the space in the death arena was only so big, but that the size of the space in the death arena varied according to the cultivation of the user. Huo Liaoyuan was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator, so when he used the death arena the space was limited to this, but if a Spirit Sea Realm cultivator used the death arena, the space might cover a few dozen kilometers or more. When Lu Ye's figure suddenly appeared here, the invisible force binding him suddenly disappeared, allowing him to regain his freedom. He immediately observed his surroundings and saw Huo Liaoyuan standing at the other end of the death arena. The surrounding environment felt familiar to him. He had been to this place before and more than once. During the Spirit Stream List battle, some of his opponents chose this kind of terrain. When others challenged him, he also chose this kind of terrain, but the range was smaller because it was more convenient for weapon cultivators to display their strength. So, was this place similar to the Spirit Stream List battle? It was just that Huo Liaoyuan used a strange artifact to allow him to enter this place together. Pushing his spirit energy, Lu Yi tried to fly out without any hindrance, but he was blocked by the barriers around him. Furthermore, he could feel the sturdiness of the barriers and knew that he couldn't break them. Being trapped in such a small space with a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator was an unprecedentedly bad situation. Although his strength had increased greatly compared to when he was in the hunting ground, he didn't think that he was a 9th Order cultivator's opponent. With the strength he could display now, he might be able to fight an 8th Order cultivator, but against a 9th Order cultivator, he would have to use his beast transformation secret technique. But Hu Po was in a deep sleep, so he couldn't use his beast transformation secret technique. So, the only trump card he could use to deal with his enemy was the Fire Phoenix Spirit Rune. But this thing needed a certain amount of time to activate, and in this small space, his enemy wouldn't be stupid enough to let him slowly accumulate strength. Once he tried to activate the Fire Phoenix Spirit Rune, he would definitely be attacked like a storm. Trouble? Don't waste your energy. Seeing that Lu Yi wanted to escape, Huo Liaoyuan's voice rang out. In the death arena, only one of us can survive. Only when one of us dies will the death arena be removed. Death arena? Lu Yi frowned slightly. He had never heard of such a thing. Although he was also a Cloud River Realm cultivator, and had even reached the 5th Order, his knowledge and experience were still too shallow compared to ordinary cultivators. It couldn't be helped. His cultivation time was too short. But based on his experience and Huo Liaoyuan's previous actions, the so-called death arena should be a treasure with a special function. Who do you think will be the one who died? Huo Liaoyuan crossed his hands behind his back and hovered more than 10 feet above the ground, looking down at Lu Yi coldly. Lu Yi glanced at him indifferently and rubbed the hilt of his mountain coiling saber with his thumb. Fortunately, the 9th Order cultivator who used the death arena against him was from the Sacred Flame sect. 99% of the Sacred Flame sect cultivators were fire attribute cultivators, and he was the least afraid of fire. If either Xia Liang or Tan Xing used the death arena today, he would definitely die. But it was Huo Liaoyuan, so the situation was hopeless. Louis Yi. Huoliao Yuan roared. Lu Ye's silence had undoubtedly angered him. He looked furious. You better accept your death obediently or else I have ways to torture you. In the death arena, external forces couldn't interfere. His cultivation was higher than Lu Ye's by a full 4 minor realms, so he was confident in his victory. But even so, it couldn't erase the anger in his heart. On this trip, the Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered heavy losses. On the first day more than 60 people had died and today nearly 20 people had died in the attack. Such losses could be said to be more than half of the people he had brought with him. He was even forced to use a precious treasure like the death arena. Even if he killed Louis Ye today, the sect would definitely hold him accountable. He only hoped that he could make up for his mistakes. Otherwise his future would be ruined. He should be able to make up for his mistakes. After all, the bounty on Louis Ye's head was too huge. As long as he killed Louis Yi, not only would he not be punished, he would also be rewarded greatly. Which first-grade sect didn't want to kill Louis Yi? Lu Ye's response was an attack. His body rushed out like a vigorous cheetah, and with the support of wind travel, he left behind an afterimage as he quickly closed the distance between them. The first goal of a weapon cultivator against a magic cultivator was to close the distance and fight in close combat. Lu Yi was only a 5th-order cultivator, but Huoliao Yuan was a 9th-order cultivator. As long as he got close to Lu Yi, it was hard to say who would die. After all, magic cultivators spent a lot of time studying magic arts, so their bodies were always weak. So, even if there was no harm in stalling for time, he took the initiative to attack. Chapter 608. Very good. Huoliao Yuan was so angry that he laughed. Lu Ye's reaction was within his expectations. If the other party was really going to resign himself to death, then he would really look down on Lu Yi. As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his hand and slapped the air in front of him. Spirit energy surged around his body with his palm as the origin. A fiery red spiritual energy disk with a radius of several tens of meters quickly spread out. Within the disk, complex lines were intertwined with each other, flashing with light. The spirit energy disk seemed to be embedded in Huoliao Yuan's palm, and as he activated his spirit energy, the disk began to glow. As soon as he activated it, fireballs of various sizes appeared out of thin air, dragging bright flames behind them as they shot towards Lu Yi like a meteor shower. As a 9th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator, he studied spirit techniques all year round. Naturally, his attainments in spirit techniques were extremely high. The meteor shower was extraordinary as soon as he made his move. The dense fireballs dragged a red glow behind them. Under Huoliao Yuan's control, they turned into arcs and rushed towards Lu Yi. Wherever they passed, space was burned and distorted. Lu Ye's figure leapt. He dodged the first few fireballs that hit him. Taking advantage of the gaps in the meteor shower, he quickly moved forward. His movements were swift. His reaction was fast. It was far beyond the level of a 5th-order cultivator. Hong hong hong. The fireballs hit the air one after another. They bombarded the deathmatch arena and the restriction barrier in the surroundings. Dazzling flames bloomed. An astonishing heat wave erupted. The calm Huoliao Yuan revealed a look of surprise. He, a 9th-order cultivator, personally took action against a 5th-order cultivator. In fact, he didn't pay too much attention. In his opinion, the difference in their cultivations was so great that he was afraid that a casual spirit technique would be enough to take Lu Ye's life. Using a spirit technique like the meteor shower was already an extremely safe response. However, Lu Ye's performance surprised him. The other party was actually able to shuttle through his meteor shower. Was this the reaction of a 5th-order cultivator? Huoliao Yuan's expression immediately became serious. It wasn't as if he had never failed miserably at an easy task, and he had warned himself before. His mind power began to surge, and the number of fireballs that surged out from the spirit energy disk in front of him increased, and their trajectories became more and more erratic. Lu Yi was like a fish swimming against the current of the fireballs. When Fire Prairie's mentality changed, he immediately felt the pressure and slowed down his swimming speed. Magic cultivators had a certain degree of control over the techniques they released, and this ability would manifest itself after a cultivator reached the 7th order. Take Lu Yi for example. When he first cultivated the Fire Phoenix technique, his cultivation was only at the 3rd order. The spell was cast. He had no way of controlling the trajectory at all, so his accuracy was extremely poor. However, once a cultivator reached the 7th order realm, they would be able to control spirit chi outside of their body. This was also the fundamental reason why cultivators could control spirit chi outside of their body. Being able to control the spirit chi inside a spirit artifact meant that they could also control techniques. The level of a magic cultivator's attainment was not only dependent on how many techniques they had mastered and how powerful they were, but also on how well they could control their own techniques. Huoliao Yuan was undoubtedly a qualified magic cultivator. Although he couldn't control all of the fireballs that surged out, he could still control a portion of them. However, the trajectory of the fireballs that were controlled by him was extremely difficult to distinguish. Just like now, Lu Yi had clearly dodged some of the fireballs, but they could still return and attack him from behind. Lu Ye's hand, which had been on the hilt of his saber all this time, flashed with a fiery red light as the mountain coiling saber was unsheathed. Under the sharp light of the saber, the incoming fireballs were split apart, creating a series of explosions. Lu Ye's protective spirit chi lingered around his body, and the scattered sparks fell, accelerating the consumption of Lu Ye's spirit chi. He didn't use the power of his talent tree. This was the reason why he was so confident in facing Huoliao Yuan. He didn't want to expose it unless it was absolutely necessary. Moreover, if he wanted to defeat a ninth-order Cloud River Realm cultivator, relying on the power of his talent tree alone was far from enough. He needed to let Huoliao Yuan consume as much of his spirit chi as possible. Only then could he kill him in a single blow when he was at his weakest. In terms of cultivation, he was indeed much weaker than Huoliao Yuan. However, other than this, Huoliao Yuan had no other advantage. Die. Huoliao Yuan suddenly let out a roar with a ferocious look on his face. Lu Ye's long blade came to an abrupt halt as he turned to look at the huge fireball in front of him. This fireball was clearly different from the others, and the spirit energy contained within it was extremely violent. Just as he was paying attention to this fireball, a chaotic and violent energy fluctuation came at the same time. The huge fireball suddenly expanded in his field of vision, accompanied by a violent buzzing sound and a scorching light. The fireball exploded, engulfing Lu Ye's figure. Huoliao Yuan didn't stop, instead taking advantage of the situation to pursue. Under his exquisite control, more fireballs poured into the fireball one after another, triggering the aura of death. The fireball suddenly surged and Lu Ye's sorry figure fell out of it. His body leaned forward slightly as he spread out his hand in front of him. A huge spirit rune appeared in front of him. At first glance, it looked like he was holding a shield. Although his other hand was badly burned by the flames, he still held onto his mountain coiling saber tightly. His feet were planted on the death arena stage. Under the huge impact, he slid back more than 300 meters before he could stabilize himself. With a crash, the spirit rune shield in front of him shattered, revealing Lu Ye's figure. His clothes were tattered and his body was covered in burn marks. Even his hair was curly and charred. He had tried his best to gradually close the distance between him and Huoliao Yuan, but his opponent had easily erased all his previous efforts and returned everything to square one. Sure enough, I hate cultivators. Lu Yi turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood to calm the tumbling blood in his chest. These fellows relied on their strength to do whatever they wanted, making him unable to use his skills at all. Huoliao Yuan was slightly taken aback. Looking at Lu Yi who had escaped, his expression suddenly became excited. Amazing, amazing. He looked as if he had discovered something new and interesting. His eyes were full of excitement and joy. A trivial fifth-order cultivator was able to block my spirit art. Lu Yi, you really are a monster. No wonder the great forces of Myriad Demon Ridge have such a headache over you. I was thinking that it wouldn't be worth it to just kill you like this. After all, I used a rare treasure like the Death Arena. Since you're so powerful. His expression suddenly became cold, and the words that came out of his mouth were like ice from the 9 nether hells. Then struggle well. No matter what, I've paid so much, so you have to let me see a good show. With another flash of light, the dense fireballs on the spirit energy disk reappeared. After the fireballs appeared, they only paused for a moment before rushing towards Lu Yi. After suffering a loss just now, how could Lu Yi not know that with his current strength, it was simply wishful thinking to rush in front of his opponent in this situation? The physique of a spirit art cultivator was indeed thin. If a weapon cultivator got close to them, most of them wouldn't have a good ending. However, they had long arms. In the face of an absolute gap in strength, it was impossible for a weapon cultivator to get close to them. Sure enough, he had to constantly consume his strength. With such a dense attack, even if Huoliao Yuan was a 9th-order cultivator, he would definitely consume a lot of energy. After making up his mind, Lu Yi immediately dashed to the side. Fireballs followed closely behind, brushing past his body as they bombarded the death arena stage and collided with the barrier, creating loud rumbling noises. As the fireballs exploded, they swept out in all directions, causing Lu Yi to feel like he was a canoe drifting in the middle of the sea, drifting about in the middle of the raging waves. Well, Liao Yuan was indeed going crazy. His expression was distorted. This might have something to do with the heavy casualties yesterday. More than 60 people had died at once, so the psychological pressure he was under was too great. Now that he had an opportunity, he could finally release it all. While urging his spirit art to attack, he laughed madly and shouted from time to time, "Run, run! Look at you, you're running like a mouse. How ugly is your posture? You want to kill me? If you want to kill me, then come. You only know how to run, but you won't have the chance to kill me." While ridiculing, he didn't forget to provoke. It could be seen that Huo Liao Yuan's temperament was very meticulous. Even in a situation where he had complete control, he still instinctively used words to influence Lu Ye's mind. Why would Lu Yi pay attention to him? Since he had made up his mind to exhaust Huo Liao Yuan's strength, the longer he delayed, the better. Boom, boom, boom. Lu Yi kept running around the death arena. Occasionally he would pretend to charge over to confuse Huo Liao Yuan. Unsurprisingly, every time he did that, Huo Liao Yuan's attacks would become more ferocious and block him. The mountain pan saber in his hand was almost like a decoration. He didn't have the chance to swing it at all. The defensive spirit inscriptions kept urging, blocking some attacks that he couldn't avoid. None of the fireballs caused direct damage to him, but the impact from the explosion still caused pain all over his body and his qi and blood to tremble. This was also the reason why he didn't urge the talent tree's power immediately. While it was true that urging the talent tree could prevent the fire elemental power from harming him, the accompanying impact and tremors couldn't be avoided. Moreover, urging the talent tree like that consumed a lot of mental strength. Even if Lu Ye's mental strength was much stronger than cultivators of the same level, he couldn't maintain it for long. He had to wait for the right opportunity to use this trump card. Only then would it have an unexpected effect. Time passed. A cup of tea, a stick of incense. Lu Yi was in an increasingly sorry state. Huo Liao Yuan's expression was no longer as relaxed as before. The meteor shower spell consumed a lot of energy. He had never maintained it for such a long time. In just a stick of incense's time, he had used up nearly half of his spirit qi. However, what made him feel helpless was that Lu Yi was still alive and kicking. Chapter 609. This was the awkwardness of a magic art cultivator. Even if the difference in cultivation was huge, if the magic art couldn't hit its target, it would be meaningless. Moreover, judging from Lu Ye's speed and response, Huo Liao Yuan couldn't help but have a strange feeling that he wasn't fighting a fifth-order weapon cultivator. In the Holy Eve Spirit Land, the cultivators of the two sects would often seek him out to exchange pointers, especially an eighth-order weapon cultivator named Mingzhe, who sought him out the most frequently. But when he compared the two, Huo Liao Yuan couldn't help but be surprised to find that Lu Yi's performance was even better than his junior brother Mingzhe's. At the very least, his junior brother Mingzhe had never been able to last so long against him. What kind of monster is this? How can a fifth-order cultivator be comparable to an eighth-order cultivator? Is what I'm seeing all of this? Even if he didn't underestimate Lu Yi from the beginning, Huo Liao Yuan was still a little shocked at this moment. With a thought, the fiery red spirit energy disk in front of him slowly disappeared. Meteor Fire Shower was a dense and violent attack, suitable for one against many, but the consumption was too high. From what he had seen so far, it was unrealistic to rely on this magic art to kill Lu Yi. Huo Liao Yuan could only think of another way. At the same time, Lu Yi, who sensed that his opponent's attack had subsided, immediately tapped his feet on the ground and turned around to pounce at Huo Liao Yuan. Wishful thinking. How could Huo Liao Yuan not know Lu Ye's plan? The other party obviously wanted to take this opportunity to close in on him. With an angry roar, spirit energy surged around his body. The fiery red spirit energy in front of him gathered and wriggled, as if something was about to pounce out. Lu Yi stared at the wriggling spirit energy and the artifact box at his waist buzzed. 9 imperial artifacts were ready to go. The distance between them quickly closed, but before Lu Yi could activate his imperial artifacts, a hissing sound came from the wriggling spirit energy in front of him. Then a fire snake several meters long and as thick as a bowl shot out. If one ignored the flames burning around the fire snake, it looked like a real snake. Its body was smooth and its scales were fine. Even its eyes and fangs were lifelike. The fire snake pounced out and hissed. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of Lu Yi and opened its mouth to bite. Lu Yi turned and dodged the attack, continuing to attack Fire Prairie. Unexpectedly, the fire snake suddenly twisted its body and whipped its flaming tail towards Lu Yi's back with great force. Lu Yi dodged the attack by a hair's breadth. His body was delayed. He turned around and saw the fire snake chasing after him as if it had a mind of its own. Another hissing sound rang out. The second fire snake slithered its body and attacked. Its speed was so fast that no one could react to it. Lu Yi didn't have time to think too much. He flipped to the side, but the two fire snakes were like living creatures. They attacked him from both sides and entangled him. The Pan Mountain blade swung down and a sharp blade aura swept out. The long blade landed on the fire snake's body, and a dull sound rang out. It was as if the blade had struck steel. This was clearly a spell formed by gathering spiritual energy, but it was as if it had been endowed with a powerful body and life. Lu Yi sighed in his heart. As expected of a professional spell cultivator. Although he could also use a similar fire dragon spell, he could only control it slightly. He definitely couldn't do it to Fire Prairie's level, which allowed the spell to last for a long time. Summoning these two fire snakes had undoubtedly consumed a lot of Fire Prairie's spiritual energy. He didn't summon a third one. Instead, he stood in place and controlled the two fire snakes to fight with Lu Yi. A large-scale spell like Meteor Fire Rain couldn't do anything to Lu Yi, so he would crush him in his area of expertise. Strictly speaking, these two fire snakes were also fighting Lu Yi in close quarters. The figures of one man and two fire snakes flitted about, and the situation became dangerous. As Lu Yi swung his Pan Mountain blade, sparks flew everywhere from time to time. Fire Prairie's expression gradually turned serious. He realized that although Lu Yi wasn't handling the situation with ease, it was impossible to kill him with just two fire snakes. These two fire snakes could last for a while, but as time passed, the power they could unleash would decrease. He couldn't drag this out any longer. Fire Prairie felt that something was wrong. He had to use the most ferocious method to kill Lu Yi in one blow. When he used the Death Arena, he never thought that Lu Yi, a fifth-order weapon cultivator, would be able to last so long under his attacks. But at this moment, no matter how much he hated Lu Yi, he had to admit that this guy was indeed a difficult opponent to deal with. With this thought in mind, he suddenly opened his arms and shook his body. In an instant, sparks flew out from the sky. At first glance, these sparks looked like fireflies. They were weak and inconspicuous, as if they would be extinguished with a blow. But the moment these sparks appeared, Lu Yi felt a great sense of crisis. The strength of one's mind came with the strength of one's perception. One could perceive many dangers and opportunities that were difficult to see with the naked eye. Lu Yi, who was fighting with the two fire snakes, glanced over at Fire Prairie and saw the sky full of fireflies floating towards him. The fireflies weren't slow, but they covered a large area. No matter what kind of technique it was definitely not something he could contend with right now. Lu Yi immediately rushed towards Fire Prairie, but two fire snakes, one on the left and one on the right, firmly blocked his path, constantly entangling him. In just a moment, the sky full of fireflies covered half of the Death Arena. Some of them even fell on Lu Yi's body, but he didn't feel much. Fire Prairie slowly raised his hand, and the spirit energy around him surged violently. He shouted, "Lu Yi, it's your honor to die under this move of mine." Lu Yi's response was a flash of light. His violent attacks finally broke through a fire snake. His legs were strengthened by wind walk. Just as he was about to run at full speed, he felt a burning sensation wrap around his body. Looking back, he saw that the fire snake that should have been broken by his saber didn't collapse after being cut in half. Instead, it wrapped around his legs like a living creature. Before Lu Yi could break free from the entanglement, another fire snake had already taken advantage of the opportunity to wrap itself around him, tying him up tightly and dragging him to the ground. Lu Yi panicked, but he didn't panic. The fight had greatly weakened the two fire snakes, so he just urged the spirit energy around him and used his arms to break the fire snake, binding him into several pieces. But he was still a step too late. Fire Prairie raised his hand and aimed it at Lu Yi. Then he clenched his hand as if he was crushing an invisible bug. He said in a cold and deep voice, "Prairie Fire Explosion Burial." A faint fluorescent light suddenly brightened 1,000 times in an instant. At the same time, the light emitted a heart-palpitating spirit energy fluctuation. If it was just a little bit of light, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't care. But at this moment, there were more than a little bit of light floating around him. There were thousands, tens of thousands. There were countless of them. Like a prairie fire, they quickly spread in all directions. All the light exploded, and in an instant, it was as if countless small suns had exploded where Lu Yi was. At this moment he had just broken free from the fire snake's entanglement. No matter how fast he was, it was impossible for him to escape this area. A loud noise accompanied by a burst of fluorescent light was heard, followed by a series of loud buzzing noises. Dazzling flames enveloped half of the death arena, and the intense heat caused space to distort. The soaring light was blocked by the barrier, and the resulting shockwaves raged back and forth in the huge death arena, causing Fire Prairie's black hair and clothes to flutter. Even the person who used this technique was dazzled by the spectacular scene in front of him. Fire Prairie laughed loudly. Finally, Lu Yi is dead. With such a technique, not to mention Lu Yi who was just a 5th order, even a 9th order master wouldn't be able to resist. This was one of Fire Prairie's trump cards. In terms of power, it was number 1 among all the techniques he had mastered. The only drawback was that its casting speed was too slow, and it had a lot of limitations. It could only be used when the enemy was restrained. The death arena wasn't big and Lu Yi was entangled by the fire snake, giving this technique the perfect opportunity to shine. Will Lu Yi die without a complete corpse? If that's the case, then there will be no witnesses. Will the big sects of Myriad Demon Ridge recognize the bounty they issued? Even if Lu Yi didn't die without a complete corpse, he would definitely be burned beyond recognition. Yes, Xiao Liang and Tan Xing witnessed me using the death arena. As long as they are willing to stand out and testify, those big sects won't go back on their word. Taking a step back, even if no one testifies, I can swear by the heaven's secret oath to prove that I killed Lu Yi. As he relaxed his mind, all kinds of thoughts suddenly popped into his mind. Fire Fire's face turned slightly pale as he sat on the ground. Although this battle didn't last long, his consumption was too great. Just the meteor fire shower lasted for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, and nearly half of his spiritual energy was consumed. After that, the fire serpent technique didn't consume too much energy, but the prairie fire explosion burial was another technique that consumed a lot of spiritual energy. At this moment, his spiritual energy was only left with about 20% of his usual spiritual energy. Moreover, his spirit chi was greatly drained and he already felt a little dizzy. Using a technique didn't just consume spirit chi, it also put a burden on the spirit chi. The more powerful the technique, the greater the burden on the spirit chi. This was one of the drawbacks of being a technique cultivator that couldn't be avoided. However, when he thought about the unimaginable reward for killing Lu Yi, Fire's mood brightened up again. However, just as the smile appeared on his face, it suddenly froze. No, the deathmatch arena had its own rules. Only one person could leave this place alive, and once one of them died, the restraints of the deathmatch arena would be instantly removed, allowing that person to return to their original position in the deathmatch arena. But why was he still in the deathmatch arena? To be continued. Chapter 610. When this thought appeared, Huoliao Yuan suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. The rules of the death arena were set by heaven's will and could not be wrong. The moment Lu Yi died, he should have been sent out of this space and returned to his original position. But he was still here. Instinctively, he raised his head and looked forward. The soaring flames were still surging, but there was only a remnant force left and it would be completely extinguished in 2 or 3 breaths. Then he saw an unbelievable truth. From the power of the technique that could turn a 9th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator into a charred corpse, a figure rushed out. How is this possible? Huoliao Yuan exclaimed. Lu Yi was not dead. How could he not be dead? That was Burning Prairie Exploding Burial, one of his trump cards. This was simply a nightmare. What made Huoliao Yuan even more incredulous was that not only was Lu Yi not dead, he wasn't even seriously injured. Although he looked battered and exhausted, his clothes were tattered and his flesh was exposed in many places, there wasn't a single trace of being burned by the flames on his exposed flesh. The injuries on his body were the same as before. His Burning Prairie Exploding Burial seemed to have only scratched an itch for Lu Yi. Such a powerful technique was naturally not just a scratch for Lu Yi. Although he had activated the power of the talent tree at the critical moment to isolate himself from the damage caused by the flames, the impact from the explosions was not something the talent tree could isolate. On the surface he did not seem to be affected, but in reality his 5 viscera and 6 bowels had been displaced. Blood was flowing in reverse in his throat, but he suppressed it with all his might. Every part of his body was in pain. He rushed out of the flames with boundless murderous intent and charged straight at Huoliao Yuan. After a brief moment of shock and horror, Huoliao Yuan finally reacted. He hurriedly got up from the ground and raised his hand to blast a few techniques at Lu Yi. However, the distance between them was now only 500 feet. This was the closest Lu Yi had been to Huoliao Yuan since they entered the death arena, and he was still closing in. The weapon box at his waist buzzed and 9 streams of light shot out one after another to meet Huoliao Yuan's techniques. Huoliao Yuan had used up a lot of his energy and was mentally exhausted. Although the spell he cast in a hurry was powerful, it was still far from his peak state. A series of explosions erupted as the oncoming spell techniques exploded in unison, sending sparks flying through the air. It was unknown whether Huo Prairie Fire was frightened or if he was trying to gather strength for himself. Every time he shouted, a spell would be unleashed. However, at such a short distance, Lu Yi was able to control his imperial equipment like an extension of his arm. The spells would often explode the moment they were cast. Lu Yi even had the energy to control half of his imperial equipment to attack Fire Prairie. Imperial weapons attacked him one after another, but they were all blocked by Huoliao Yuan's protective spiritual light. They couldn't hurt him at all, but they still made him lose his balance. 300 feet, 20 feet, 10 feet. Lu Yi leaped high into the air and used his imperial equipment to clear the obstacles in front of him. The mountain coiling saber in his hand ignited and his right arm that was holding the saber bulged slightly. Like a hungry wolf pouncing on its prey, Huoliao Yuan, who clearly had a higher cultivation, panicked. Of course, he knew the consequences of letting a weapon cultivator close in on him as a Dharma cultivator, especially one like Lu Yi. Although he was only a 5th-order weapon cultivator, Huoliao Yuan judged that he was not inferior to an 8th-order weapon cultivator. The gap between 1st-order weapon cultivators wasn't as big as he imagined. He had once been approached by his junior brother, Mingzhe, in the Spirit Land, and it took him a lot of effort to get rid of him. At that time he was in his peak state. In his panic he stumbled back while not forgetting to cast a spell. It had to be said that his attainments in magic arts were truly impressive. Even in such a situation, casting spells had become an instinct. 3 fire arrows flew out in a triangular formation, but they were all blocked by Lu Ye's imperial equipment. The saber that had been accumulating power for a long time slashed down. Flash. The moment the saber fell, the protective aura around Huoliao Yuan's body burst out with an even more dazzling light. It was obvious that he had used more spirit energy to protect himself. A loud sound rang out as spirit energy surged. Lu Ye's arm went numb while Huoliao Yuan was sent flying. The protective aura around his body hadn't dissipated yet, so Lu Ye's attack didn't take his life. However, the terrifying power contained in the attack was all added to Huoliao Yuan's body. Just like how Lu Ye's talent tree couldn't block the damage caused by the impact, Huoliao Yuan's protective aura couldn't block it either. However, Lu Yi could feel that the protective aura around Huoliao Yuan's body seemed to be elastic when his saber slashed down. This should be able to dissolve part of the force. Lu Yi had heard that there were 2 types of protective aura. One was rigid and the other was elastic. Rigid aura was like a barrier that wouldn't change shape. As long as the barrier didn't break, the cultivator wouldn't be injured. Elastic aura was different. This type of protective aura would cave in and dissolve part of the force. Both types of protective aura had their pros and cons. It depended on the cultivator's choice. However, if one wanted to make their protective aura elastic, they had to have great control over their own spirit energy. Moreover, it required a lot of practice. Not all cultivators could do it. Generally speaking, less than 20% of cultivators at the Cloud River tier could do it. Lu Yi didn't know much about protective aura. Usually, when he encountered an enemy and needed to protect himself, he would activate the defensive spirit tattoo. The defensive power of the defensive spirit tattoo was much stronger than pure protective aura. Huoliao Yuan's control over his own spirit energy was undoubtedly very good. That was why he was able to unleash such an elastic protective aura. Otherwise, he would have been hit by at least 30% of the force just now. Even so, Huoliao Yuan still spat out a mouthful of blood in midair. Even if he was a 9th-order spirit cultivator, it couldn't change the fact that his physique was thin. Of course, this was only in comparison. He felt as if his bones were about to break when he was hit by such a huge force. His stomach churned and his vision blurred. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Lu Yi following him like a shadow. He didn't wait for Huoliao Yuan to land before he slashed down again. This strike caused Huoliao Yuan's body to sink as he plummeted downwards. At the same time, Lu Yi sent out a kick, causing Huoliao Yuan to spin and fly 20 to 30 feet before crashing into the barrier of the deathmatch arena. Huoliao Yuan landed awkwardly and howled in pain. His eyes were filled with fear and panic. If someone had told him before today that he would be beaten like a dog by a fifth-order spirit cultivator, he would have snorted disdainfully. But at this moment he was really experiencing such a ridiculous thing. Everything was clearly under his control. He could have killed Lu Ye to wash away yesterday's humiliation and make up for his mistakes in exchange for a lifetime of endless wealth. How did it turn out like this? Wah! Huoliao Yuan coughed up blood not far away. He endured the pain all over his body and struggled to stand up. His blurred vision focused and he saw Lu Yi half kneeling on the ground with his long saber in hand. There was a pool of blood in front of him. Huoliao Yuan's eyes lit up at this scene. He was also injured. He wasn't as majestic as he looked. Huoliao Yuan didn't realize that he had changed from a master who had complete control of the situation to a person who was worried about personal gains and losses. He was even overjoyed when his opponent coughed up blood and got injured. Lu Yi was feeling very uncomfortable. He had originally planned to kill Huoliao Yuan in one go, but his excessive actions had aggravated his injuries. He had no choice but to stop chasing. After coughing up blood he finally felt a little better. Looking up, Huoliao Yuan was also looking at him with a fierce gaze and surging spirit energy. Without any communication the two moved almost at the same time. Lu Yi, as usual, used his artifact to clear the path and pounced forward. Huoliao Yuan, on the other hand, used all kinds of techniques. However, one's aura was very similar to sometimes. Once it was weak and couldn't be hardened no matter what. Even though there was a difference of 4 minor levels between them, many of Huoliao Yuan's techniques were blocked by Lu Ye's artifact. The distance between them quickly closed again. Huoliao Yuan's forced calm expression was filled with panic. When Lu Yi was only 10 meters away from him, an irresistible wave of qi accompanied by an explosion of spirit energy swept out in all directions. Lu Yi felt as if a wall had slammed into him and his body was pushed away uncontrollably. Lu Yi didn't know what this technique was called, but almost all the Dharma cultivators he had met had cultivated this technique. Once it was used they could push everything around them far away. Dharma cultivators were most afraid of enemies getting close to them. This technique was undoubtedly able to save their lives in many cases. If they were in the wilderness, Huoliao Yuan could have used this opportunity to escape. However, this was a deathmatch arena that he had created himself. It was only 300 meters long and wide. Where could he escape to? Pushing Lu Yi away was just prolonging his last breath. In just 3 short breaths, Lu Yi had closed in on him again. While nimbly dodging a few techniques, he slashed out with his mountain plate saber. Huoliao Yuan was sent flying again under the huge impact like a ragged sack. The protective spirit light around his body had clearly dimmed by a lot. In midair he could smell the aura of death. He had once felt this aura when he was in the spirit stream realm. At that time he was lucky to have a senior brother to protect him and save him from a disaster. He remembered this feeling very clearly. However, he was now alone. The senior brother who had saved him had died many years ago. He knew that when Lu Ye broke through his blockade and closed in on him, he had already lost. Time seemed to slow down a lot at that moment. All sorts of chaotic thoughts flashed through his mind. In midair, Huoliao Yuan turned his head to look in the direction of the source of the danger. He saw Lu Yi rushing over quickly. The powerful pressure made it hard for him to breathe. To be continued. Chapter 6:11. He had to do something or he would definitely die. Huoliao Yuan's strong desire to live made him break through his limits. The remaining spirit energy in his body boiled, and his mind was focused like never before. Pa! Huoliao Yuan suddenly clasped his hands together and opened his fingers. A dot of light suddenly appeared in his palms and quickly expanded, releasing a bright light. Violent and chaotic spirit energy fluctuations were released. Huoliao Yuan seemed to be hugging a small sun between his hands. Traces of spirit energy could be seen flowing on the small sun. At this moment, Lu Yi was only 10 feet away from Huoliao Yuan. Huoliao Yuan's actions alerted him. He had never underestimated his opponent, but he did not stop running because of this. He could cross 10 feet in one breath. At that time, no matter how powerful Huoliao Yuan's spell was, he would be able to kill him with a single slash. Huoliao Yuan's spirit energy was dim at this moment. It was obvious that he was like a lamp that had run out of oil. He poured all of his remaining spirit energy into the small sun in front of him. At this moment, Huoliao Yuan suddenly pushed his hands horizontally, and the small sun in his palms quickly swept towards Lu Yi. As it rushed over, the spirit energy flowing on the surface of the small sun surged faster and faster, peeling off layer by layer like a blooming flower. As the flaming petals bloomed, a terrifying aura instantly filled the entire deathmatch arena. In the blink of an eye, the small sun turned into a huge flaming lotus. Lu Yi had already dodged in advance, but he did not expect such a change. By the time he realized it, he was already wrapped in the flaming lotus. The flaming lotus bloomed silently. It was not as powerful as Huo Liaoyuan's exploding burial, nor was it as grand as Meteor Shower. However, the power it displayed was more terrifying than any of the previous two spells. It was a terrifyingly high temperature that could melt everything. This was Huo Liaoyuan's other trump card, a trump card that he had not fully grasped. Normally, when he used this spell, there was a 50% chance of failure. Therefore, Huo Liaoyuan never dared to use this spell when facing an enemy, lest he hurt himself instead of the enemy. This time, if he had not been forced into a corner, he would not have dared to take the risk. Fortunately, luck was on his side. Although there was only a 50% chance of success, he still managed to use it. Perhaps it was the effect of extreme concentration brought about by the immense pressure. His face was as pale as paper as he quietly watched the blooming fire lotus. Seeing Lu Ye's figure completely engulfed, he truly breathed a sigh of relief. This time, Lu Ye wouldn't be able to survive, right? Just as this thought popped up in his mind, his pupils suddenly shrank and his eyes trembled violently. Right in front of them, a figure slowly walked out from the blooming fire lotus. His expression was relaxed and his movements were leisurely. It was as if he wasn't stepping into the vortex of death, but his own backyard. His expression was calm and without the slightest fluctuation. Lu Yi didn't know what Fire Prairie's spell was, but judging from Fire Prairie's performance and his own senses, the spell was indeed terrifying. However, under the protection of the talent tree, he was able to isolate himself from the flames. Comparatively speaking, the damage caused by the fire lotus to Lu Yi was not as great as the prairie fire explosion burial. At the very least, the impact of the burning prairie bursting burial had injured him quite badly. The fire lotus that had silently bloomed in front of him hadn't even burned off a single strand of his hair. Ha! Fire Prairie let out an involuntary exclamation. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, his face full of fear. It was another nightmarish scene. First, it was the prairie fire explosion burial. Now it was the fire lotus. What did Lu Ye do? Why was he able to withstand two of his trump cards and not die? Was he dreaming or what? However, the weakness and pain in his body constantly reminded Fire Prairie that this wasn't a dream. Step by step, Lu Yi slowly moved to within 30 feet of Fire Prairie. The huge fire lotus behind him slowly dissipated. The distorted space from the high temperature also seemed to be gently smoothed out by an invisible hand. Their eyes met. Fire Prairie's dry lips moved as if he wanted to say something. However, in the end he didn't say anything. He only roared angrily and charged towards Lu Yi. There wasn't a drop of spiritual energy left in his body. As a spell cultivator without spiritual energy, he didn't even have the ability to use spells. However, he didn't admit defeat, nor did he beg for mercy. This was the deathmatch arena. Only one person could survive. Lu Yi didn't move. With a twist of his wrist, the blade flashed. He gently swung the mountain plate saber and returned it to its sheath. There was a dull thud behind him. Blood flowed out and dyed the floor of the deathmatch arena red. In the spiritual land, the wolf pack and the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were separated by a distance of 100 feet. This distance was within the cultivators' attack range. However, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land didn't attack the wolf pack. They were facing off against the wolf pack because they were waiting for Fire Prairie. According to the rules of the deathmatch arena, both sides would fight to the death. When one side died, the other side would also be sent back to their original position. Previously, Fire Prairie had activated the deathmatch arena's power in the Return to Heaven spiritual land and lured Lu Yi into the arena. Therefore, he would appear in the Return to Heaven spiritual land. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had to ensure that they could receive Fire Prairie the moment he appeared. They didn't attack, so the wolf pack naturally wouldn't ask for trouble. On the side, Li Baxian's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip blood. He constantly checked Lu Ye's battlefield imprint to confirm whether he was alive or not. When Lu Yi was lured into the deathmatch arena, Li Baxian almost went crazy. He really didn't expect Fire Prairie to have such a rare treasure. His little junior brother was only a 5th order cultivator. How big was the difference in cultivation between Fire Prairie's 9th order? Although his little junior brother's foundation was strong and he was good at killing enemies above his realm, there was always a limit to everything. Li Baxin didn't think that Lu Yi was Fire Prairie's opponent. If Lu Yi had Hu Po's help to activate his beast transformation secret technique, Li Baxin would have some confidence in him. However, Hu Po had fallen into a deep sleep and Lu Yi couldn't cooperate with him at all. In this battle, his little junior brother was doomed. Li Baxin hated that he couldn't take his place. But even he didn't have the confidence to win against Fire Prairie. The atmosphere in the entire Return to Heaven spiritual land was extremely stifling. Time passed. A cup of tea, a stick of incense. Li Baxin's expression became strange. In his imagination, his little junior brother would only be able to last 100 breaths against Fire Prairie. However, a stick of incense had already passed and his little junior brother was still safe and sound. Li Baxin suddenly realized that he might have underestimated his little junior brother. Or maybe Hu Po had suddenly awakened. If that was the case, then as long as his little junior brother could activate his beast transformation secret technique, it would be hard to say who would die in this battle. As time continued to pass, Li Baxin became more and more certain that Hu Po had awakened at this critical moment. It was even possible that his little junior brother had awakened him. His original anxiety and uneasiness were swept away. Li Baxin quietly waited for Lu Ye's return. He believed that his little junior brother could defeat Fire Prairie as long as he could activate his beast transformation secret technique. On the opposite side, the cultivators of Holy Eve's spiritual land looked very relaxed. In their opinion, Fire Prairie's cultivation was 4 minor realms higher than Lu Ye's, so how could he lose? The longer the battle dragged on, the more likely it was that their senior brother Hua was toying with Lu Ye. At this moment, Lu Ye must be suffering a fate worse than death. What they needed to do was very simple. They just needed to hurry over when Fire Prairie returned. What is Fire Prairie doing? Somewhere in the crowd, Xiao Liang softly muttered. Although it was a pity that he couldn't personally kill Lu Yi, since Fire Prairie had said that they were willing to give him 20% of the reward, they would definitely fulfill their promise. However, this guy's efficiency was too slow. He had been in there for so long, yet he still hadn't come out. Didn't he know that a long delay would only bring more trouble? Let's wait a little longer. Maybe he will come out soon. Tan Xing advised. Xiao Liang nodded slightly and raised his eyes to look ahead. He said in a low voice, "Brother Tan, I need you to lend me a hand." "Please speak, Brother Xia." Xiao Liang said, "I want to kill Li Baxin." His initial goal was to kill Li Baxin. Yan Xing had died in Li Baxin's hands, so he had to avenge Yan Xing. When he targeted Lu Yi in the hunting ground, his biggest goal was to lure Li Baxin out. In the end, he implicated the Wild Blade sect and caused them to pay a large amount of resources. This was also the cause of his enmity with Lu Yi. Although there were many twists and turns in the process, he still hadn't forgotten his original goal. In comparison, he wanted to kill Li Baxin more. Now that Lu Yi was destined to die in the hands of Fire Prairie, he only had one goal left. Tan Xing naturally knew Xiao Liang's obsession with Li Baxin, so he nodded and said, "I will cooperate with Brother Xia when the time comes." Xiao Liang said, "Many thanks. If this matter succeeds, if this Xia needs help in the future, don't hesitate to call me." Tan Xing's eyes lit up. Although his strength wasn't much worse than Xiao Liang's, there was still a gap between their sects. The Wild Blade sect was 1st grade, while the New Moon sect he was in was 3rd grade. Getting such a promise from Xiao Liang wouldn't be a bad thing in the future. Sometimes things like favors were very precious. "Brother Xia, you are too polite. I'm coming out," Tan Xing suddenly whispered. At the same time, everyone noticed something strange. Because a dot of light suddenly bloomed in mid-air, and then the light revealed the shadow of the death arena. A white light shot out from the death arena and landed in a certain position. The space in that position suddenly distorted, and then a figure appeared out of thin air. The cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land who were ready to rush over to help seemed to have been hit by a lightning talisman. They all froze in place, their eyes trembling and filled with disbelief. In the crowd, Tan Xing's eyelids twitched wildly, and Xiao Liang exclaimed, "How is this possible?" It was as if he had seen something extremely inconceivable. To be continued. Chapter 6:12. In the Return to Heaven spiritual land, the shadow of the death arena appeared. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a figure appeared. However, what shocked the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land was that the one who returned was not senior brother Hua whom they had been longing for, but Lu Ye. No, Huo Liao Yuan had also returned. However, at this moment he was like a dead dog in Lu Ye's hand. A huge hole was clearly visible in his chest, and blood was flowing out with a dripping sound. There was no sign of life on his body, so he was obviously just a corpse. Many Holy Eve Spirit Land cultivators felt their scalps go numb as a chill swept through their bodies. Senior Brother Hua was killed? How could Senior Brother Hua, who was a Cloud River Realm Ninth Order cultivator, be killed? Although they didn't want to believe their eyes, the truth was right in front of them. They had no choice but to believe it. On the other hand, Li Baxin finally breathed a sigh of relief after Lu Yi appeared. Just now, he felt that his little junior brother might not lose, but it was definitely just a kind of hope, a kind of prayer. Li Baxin was completely relieved when Lu Yi appeared in front of him intact. But then he was puzzled again. In his imagination, Lu Yi should have awakened the sleeping Hu Pe and cooperated with Hu Pe to have the capital to fight against Huo Liao Yuan. But now Hu Pe was still nowhere to be seen. Obviously he was still sleeping in the spirit beast bag. In other words, little junior brother was able to kill Huo Liao Yuan with his own strength? Killing an enemy 4 realms above him? Even if the truth was right in front of him, Li Baxin was still shocked. Since ancient times, such a thing had never happened before. The so-called killing of an enemy above one's realm was generally only 1 or 2 realms higher. It was extremely rare to be able to kill an enemy 3 realms higher, let alone 4. Just as many thoughts were surging in his mind, Lu Yi suddenly raised his hand and threw the corpse in his hand away. A few Holy Eve Spirit Land disciples hurriedly caught it. Retreat. Frightened voices sounded. The Holy Eve Spirit Land cultivators woke up from a dream and hurriedly retreated. Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng were mixed in the crowd. Even after they left the range of the Spirit Land, they still couldn't hide the shock on their faces. The wolves didn't chase because it was meaningless. After the Holy Eve Spirit Land cultivators left returning Heaven Valley, Lu Yi activated the power of the concealment array. Ripples spread out, and the entire Spirit Land was covered by the array. His body could not help but stagger as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Little junior brother. Li Baxin hurriedly stepped forward to support him. Feng Yuechan hurriedly took out a healing pill and stuffed it into Lu Ye's mouth. After swallowing the spirit pill, Lu Yi waved his hand and said, "It's nothing serious. I need to recuperate for a while. The other party probably won't dare to act rashly for the time being. As for the spiritual land, senior brother and senior sister Feng, please take care of it." Li Baxin nodded. "Don't worry, I'll inform you immediately if anything happens." Lu Yi turned around and walked into his wooden house. He sat down cross-legged and silently operated his Xian Qi to recover. His injuries from the battle with Fire Prairie weren't serious, but they weren't light either. They were mainly internal injuries. Fortunately, his physique was strong enough so it shouldn't be difficult for him to recover. Watching Lu Yi enter the room, Li Baxin's expression was indescribably complicated. Feng Yuechan vaguely sensed something and asked, "What is senior brother thinking about?" Li Baxin smiled. "I'm thinking about the first time I met little junior brother. At that time their little junior brother had been trapped on top of the golden light and Wei Yang had been the first to arrive, followed by Lu Yi. With the strength of the two of them they had protected him. Although they had never met before, just based on their identities as disciples of Blue Blood sect, they had already regarded Lu Yi as family. That battle could be considered the battle that made Lu Yi famous. Since then, Lu Yi of the Blue Blood sect was unstoppable and made a name for himself on the Spirit Stream battlefield. Thinking back, it had only been 2 or 3 years. Little junior brother, who needed the protection of his senior brother and senior sister, had actually grown to such a height. Li Baxin could not help but feel that his own child had grown up. At the entrance of returning Sky Valley, the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land had sorrowful expressions. The atmosphere was stifling. Even now, they had not recovered from the grievous news of Fire Prairie's death. A cultivator's path of cultivation was full of ups and downs. Life and death were normal. It was not that these people had not experienced life and death. On the contrary, each of them had experienced a lot of it. If Fire Prairie was killed by a Ninth Order cultivator, it would not be a big deal. There was still a difference in strength between Ninth Order cultivators. If he was killed, it could only be said that his cultivation was inferior and his skills were inferior. But Fire Prairie died at the hands of Lu Yi. Even now, they could not understand how the powerful senior brother Hua was killed by Lu Yi. What happened in the death arena? But they had no way of knowing the details. After all, only Lu Yi and Fire Prairie were in the death arena. Only they knew the whole story of the battle. Among the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land who came this time, Fire Prairie was the only Ninth Order cultivator, but there were several 8th Order cultivators. One of them was Mingzhi. Although he was from the Huanyu sect, because he and Huo Liaoyuan had similar temperaments, they would often find Huo Liaoyuan to spar. Huo Liaoyuan had never declined, so the two of them had a very good relationship. At this moment, Mingzhe was holding back his grief and examining Fire Prairie's corpse. Although Fire Prairie was dead, there were many marks on his body that might provide some clues that would allow Mingzhe to speculate about the situation of the battle. The fatal wound was on his chest. Fire Prairie's heart was directly crushed. There were many wounds on his body, but they were not caused by sharp weapons. They seemed to be bruises caused by a huge impact. After examining for a long time, Mingzhe could not find any useful clues. But judging from the injuries, Fire Prairie seemed to have engaged in a life-and-death battle with Lu Yi. In the end, Fire Prairie was defeated and killed by Lu Yi. But, was this possible? With a difference of 4 minor realms, what qualifications did Lu Yi have to fight with Fire Prairie? Just as Mingzhe was feeling puzzled, he suddenly received a message from the battlefield mark. He quickly checked it and found that it was a message from Tu Guanxiong. It was a simple question: what happened? He had obviously received news of Fire Prairie's death. Mingzhe held back his grief and recounted everything that had happened in the past 2 days. When he heard that they had lost more than 60 people in the first battle, Tu Guanxiong was speechless for a long time. When Fire Prairie led his men out of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, Tu Guanxiong tried his best to get him to bring more men. A total of 70% of the spiritual land's forces were mobilized. In addition to the Sacred Fire Sect disciples that Fire Prairie had gathered, they had lost more than 60 of their 150 people. This was truly unbelievable. Mingzhe then heard that Fire Prairie had used the Death Arena to lure Lu Yi into the space of the Death Arena. But in the end, the one who came out alive was Lu Yi, and Fire Prairie was the one who became a corpse. Do you know how Brother Fire was killed? A knife through his heart. I don't know anything else. Tu Guanxiong was silent for a moment. It seems like Lu Yi has some powerful treasure. This was the only possibility that could explain Fire Prairie's tragic death at the hands of Lu Yi. He did not think that Lu Yi could have killed Fire Prairie with his own abilities given the huge difference in their cultivation levels. Senior Brother Tu, what do we do now? Mingzhe did not know what to do and felt that his mind was in a mess. It was unrealistic to attack by force. The other party had a pack of wolves. If they dared to step into the area covered by the sky ceiling formation, they would definitely not be able to return. However, they were unwilling to retreat just like that. So many people had died. If they did not take revenge, how could they return to the spiritual land? Continuing to wait for reinforcements here was an option. Previously, Tu Guanxiong had already gathered more Huanyu sect disciples to rush here. However, it would take time. Even if they managed to wait, they might not be able to do anything. They had suffered too many casualties and had lost almost half of their men. The number of cultivators that Tu Guanxiong could gather was also limited. What about Xiao Liang from the Mad Blade sect and Tan Xing from the New Moon sect? Tu Guanxiong asked. When they were talking about what had happened in the past 2 days, Mingzhe also briefly mentioned Xiao Liang and Tan Xing. They are still here. Mingzhe replied, it seems that they are not willing to leave just like that. Perhaps we can borrow their strength? No. Tu Guanxiong immediately rejected. One of them is from a first-grade sect while the other is from a third-grade sect. They are not people that we can provoke now. If we dare to borrow their strength, we will definitely be used by them. When they kill Lu Yi, all the benefits will be theirs. Senior Brother Hua mentioned to me before that the information about Lu Yi should be from the two of them. Are you sure? Senior Brother Hua can basically confirm this. Just as Senior Brother Hua predicted, these two people have suffered losses before. They know that they can't take down Lu Yi with their strength, so they want to borrow his strength. Damn it. They actually caused such a huge loss to our Holy Eve spiritual land. Tu Guanxiong was furious. The Holy Eve spiritual land was originally safe and sound. However, when they suddenly received news about Lu Yi, things got out of hand and developed to the current situation. Then, Senior Brother, what should we do now? Mingzhe asked again. Tu Guanxiong did not respond for a long time. After a full incense stick worth of time, he replied, I will spread the news about Lu Yi. When the time comes, there will definitely be many people coming to kill him. You guys act according to the situation. With the current strength of the Holy Eve spiritual land, there was no way they could avenge Fire Prairie and his dead brothers. Tu Guanxiong was furious at Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng's crafty schemes, so he would not borrow their strength. Even if he did, it might not be enough. Returning Sky Spirit Land was covered by a space-restricting array. Once cultivators broke in, the first thing they would have to face was a pack of wolves. In such a situation, two Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators could only play a limited role. Since that was the case, they would spread the news. Now, in Myriad Demon's Ridge, there were countless cultivators who wanted to find traces of Wuxia. Once this news spread, countless cultivators would definitely swarm in. Wuxia would die even if he did not want to. Although this way the Holy Eve spiritual land would not be able to monopolize the bounty on Wuxia, this was the only way Tu Guanxiong could think of. At that time, no matter who killed Wuxia, it would be considered as revenge for the tragic deaths of Fire Prairie and Holy Eve spiritual land. Chapter 6:13. At the entrance of returning Sky Valley, Xiao Liang and Tan Xing were also discussing the cause of Huo Liao Yuan's death. Similar to Tu Guanxiong, the two of them did not think that Lu Yi could have killed Huo Liao Yuan with his own strength. With the difference in cultivation, no matter how strong Lu Ye's foundation was, he could not have done something so unbelievable. What's more, the two of them more or less understood Lu Ye's strength. Although Lu Ye's cultivation had increased by 2 minor realms compared to when they were in the hunting ground, he was still only a 5th order. Huo Liao Yuan has a rare treasure like the Death Arena, so Lu Yi might have other rare treasures. Huo Liao Yuan died in shame. Tan Xing sighed with some lingering fear. He was stronger than Huo Liao Yuan, but there was a limit to it. If Lu Yi had the ability to kill Huo Liao Yuan, it meant that he had the ability to kill him. However, rare treasures were hard to come by and were basically one-time consumables. Since Lu Yi used it on Huo Liao Yuan, it was equivalent to Huo Liao Yuan stepping into a hole for them. Otherwise, he or Xiao Liang might have died. In a way, the two of them had to thank Huo Liao Yuan. Huo Liao Yuan's death is not to be regretted, but... Xiao Liang turned to look at the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land and saw that there seemed to be an invisible cloud over there. All the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land were in low spirits. They wanted to borrow the power of the Holy Eve spiritual land to break the various arrangements in Lu Ye's spiritual land, but things did not go as they wished. The Holy Eve spiritual land had suffered huge losses, while Lu Ye's side had only lost a few spirit arrays and a few monster wolves. Their losses were almost negligible. They could not help but feel frustrated. Huo Liao Yuan was too useless. They are leaving? Tan Xing suddenly noticed something strange. The cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land seemed to be retreating. Xiao Liang frowned and could not help but step forward to stop Mingzhi. "Junior brother, where are you going?" Mingzhi looked up at him with burning anger in his eyes. It was these two who killed his senior brother Hua and so many of his junior brothers and sisters. Fortunately, he also knew that he couldn't afford to offend these two people, so he suppressed his anger and said indifferently, "Naturally, we're leaving this place." They didn't want to leave, but if they continued to stay here, they might be ambushed again at night. A few of them had already died last night, and that was under the premise that Huo Liao Yuan was present. Now that Huo Liao Yuan was dead, how could they dare to stay? As an 8th Order Cloud River Realm cultivator, Tu Guanxiong had told him to act according to the circumstances, so he naturally had his own judgment and knew that this was a dangerous place. Xiao Liang frowned. "You're leaving just like that?" Mingzhi's eyes were bloodshot. He gritted his teeth and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Xiao, what advice do you have?" Xiao Liang said, "Of course we have to avenge our grievances. If the people of the Holy Eve spiritual land were to leave, then what was the point of playing?" Mingzhi took a look and then looked at Tan Xing. "Senior brothers, please teach me how to take revenge." How to take revenge? Could it be that the two senior martial brothers are leading us, the remnants of the defeated army, to charge and kill? If the two senior brothers are willing to take the lead, everyone in the Holy Eve spiritual land will listen to your orders. Xiao Liang was speechless for a moment. Although there were many remnants of the defeated army, if they really wanted to attack Lu Ye's spiritual land, it was still not enough, unless they had a way to deal with the wolf pack first. Mingzhi hated the information sent by these two, and even more hated their attitude of wanting to take advantage of the situation. He didn't say anything else and just cupped his fists slightly. He then led the cultivators of the Holy Eve spiritual land onto the spirit ship. A moment later, the spirit ship took off and flew away. 2 days ago, more than 150 of them came in a mighty manner. In just 2 days, the leader, Huo Liao Yuan, was dead and only half of the 150 of them survived. The experience of these 2 days was like a nightmare for everyone. The group withdrew from Taimeng Mountain and stopped at the edge of the mountain. Tu Guanxiong wanted to spread the news of Lu Ye's location. It could be foreseen that it wouldn't be long before Taimeng Mountain became lively. Although these people didn't have the ability to take revenge on their own, they still wanted to see Lu Ye killed with their own eyes. Only then could they vent the hatred in their hearts. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land retreated under Mingzhi's lead, but Xiao Liang and Tan Xing didn't leave. They stood at the entrance of Huitian Valley and looked in the direction of the spiritual land. The two of them were silent. After a long time, Tan Xing said, "Brother Xiao, what are your plans?" Xiao Liang said, "I'm considering if we should completely expose the news of Lu Ye." Tan Xing said, "He has the Tianji pillar. If he senses that something is wrong, he will definitely escape back to the 9 states. So even if we do this, we can't really do anything to him. At most, we will just destroy one of his spiritual land." Of course I know. But even if we can't do anything to him, we can't just leave him be. He still has to cultivate in the Cloudy River battlefield. If we destroy his spiritual land today, we will have the chance to kill him next time. If we don't do anything, we will never have the chance to kill him. Moreover, Huoliaoyuan has the death arena. Maybe others have it too. It's not impossible to kill him. Although he knew that the possibility was not high, Tan Xing still agreed, "That's true." The reason why they only revealed the news of Lu Ye to the Holy Eve's spiritual land was because they were afraid that they would push too far. If they really did that, Lu Ye would escape back to the 9 states with the help of the Tianji pillar. Then all their plans would be useless. If they only let the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land attack, Lu Ye would not be so desperate. They would only have the chance to take advantage of the situation when both sides were injured. In the end, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were too useless. In just 2 days they were beaten to a pulp. Even Huoliaoyuan, who led the team, was killed. In the current situation, it was not possible to kill Lu Ye. They could only force him to give up the spiritual land and find a better opportunity in the future. After making up his mind, Xiao Liang was about to send a message when Tan Xing received it first. After checking and communicating with the other party, he said in surprise, "Brother Xia, someone is 1 step ahead of us." What? Xiao Liang didn't understand. Someone has already leaked Lu Ye's location. The message that Tan Xing received was from a junior brother in the sect, informing him of Lu Ye's current location. This junior brother couldn't have known this for no reason. After asking, he found out that many people already knew about this. It's the work of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. Xiao Liang immediately reacted. Now, only the two of them and the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land knew about Lu Ye's location. Just as they made up their minds, someone else had already taken action. Other than the Holy Eve's spiritual land, there was no one else. Xiao Liang didn't know who was in charge of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, but he could understand the original intention of the other party. In any case, it saved him some trouble. Taimong Mountain is going to be lively. Xiao Liang sighed. "Let's go." Tan Xing was stunned. "Brother Xia, you're not staying?" Xiao Liang said, "Why should I stay? To see how Lu Ye will escape back to the 9 states? Tan Xing thought about it and agreed. According to the current development of the situation, Lu Ye would be in a desperate situation soon. When that time came, he would definitely use the Tianji pillar to escape back to the 9 states, leaving all the cultivators here in vain. There was no point in staying. What they needed to do now was to wait for the next time Lu Ye entered the Cloudy River battlefield, secretly investigate and find an opportunity to kill him. In the spiritual land, Lu Ye was silently healing his injuries. The benefits of a strong physique were revealed at this moment. If an ordinary cultivator suffered such injuries, they would need at least 10 days to half a month to recover. However, Lu Ye was almost fully recovered in just 1 or 2 days. At the same time, with Tu Guanxiong adding fuel to the fire, the news of Lu Ye hiding in the Huitian Valley of Taimong Mountain spread like wildfire. Ever since the hunting ground incident, the major sects of the Wanmo Ridge increased the bounty on him. This also stimulated the nerves of countless cultivators of the Wanmo Ridge. During this period of time, countless people were secretly paying attention to his whereabouts. Unfortunately, no one expected him to hide in the depths of Taimong Mountain. Moreover, he was shrouded in a large formation. Even if there were cultivators passing by, they wouldn't be able to detect the situation of the spiritual land. Only Xiao Liang, Tan Xing, and the others, with the help of special treasures, could barely find the approximate location. In the end, 1 died and 2 were injured, and they had to escape in a sorry state. Now that the news suddenly spread, those cultivators who were searching for Lu Ye's whereabouts were like cats that smelled blood. They rushed in the direction of Taimong Mountain from all directions. In an instant, undercurrents surged in the Cloudy River battlefield. 2 days after killing Huoliao Yuan, Lu Ye's injuries were healed. In the wooden house, the 4 people of the spiritual land sat upright. Li Baxian said, "The people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land should have retreated. We haven't seen them in these 2 days. Junior brother Giant Armor let the demon wolf search around before, but we didn't see anyone. Even Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng are gone." As expected. Lu Ye nodded. The Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered such a huge loss this time, and they also had to be on guard against Lu Ye's attacks. Naturally, they couldn't stay here and wait for death. As for Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had left. There was no point for them to stay here alone. "But senior brother, there's a high chance that we won't be able to keep the spiritual land." First, Xiao Liang and the others came together. Now, even the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land knew about it. The location of the spiritual land was completely exposed. The more time passed, the more people would know about it. Lu Ye found that he had no fate with the spiritual land. When he first entered the Cloudy River battlefield, his luck was off the charts. He picked up a grade C spiritual land. In the end, he entered the secret realm of the realm of beasts with Xin Xiaotong. The spiritual land was destroyed and the spring spirit was stolen. In the hunting ground, he finally obtained the reward of being first on the hunting list and a grade A spring spirit. He deliberately placed the spiritual land in the depths of Taimang Mountain and had the protection of the wolf pack. But he didn't expect that not long after, something like this would happen again. Lu Ye sometimes wondered if the so-called blessing of the heavens really existed. If it existed, why was he so unlucky sometimes? But there were other times when he did feel that he was blessed with luck. Take what happened in the Fox Immortal Valley for example. The fox demon had been domineering in the Fox Immortal Valley for nearly 20 years, but she met someone like him who could restrain her ability. In the end, he killed the fox demon and saved many people. He was even rewarded by the heavens, and his foundation increased greatly. The matter of luck was really puzzling. To be continued. Chapter 6:14. Li Baxian had also expected that they would not be able to keep the spiritual land. This was the norm on the Cloudy River battlefield. Many spiritual lands had changed owners several times. Only those large spiritual lands with more people could maintain a transcendent position on the Cloudy River battlefield and be passed down from generation to generation. "What does junior brother plan to do?" he asked. "2 paths. Lu Yi raised 2 fingers. "Now we will take back the spring spirit and return to the 9 regions. After returning to the 9 regions from the Cloudy River battlefield, we will have to wait a month before we can enter the Cloudy River battlefield again. The earlier we leave, the earlier we can enter." Li Baxian laughed. Lu Ye's words gave people the feeling of dying early and reincarnating early. "Or we cannot return to the 9 regions and start moving now to a more secluded place. But no matter what, the spiritual land we will obtain will only be a B-grade spiritual land." Every time the spring spirit was taken back, it would drop by a grade. Although there was only a grade difference between A grade and B grade, the concentration of spiritual energy in the spiritual land was completely different. What about the second path? Wait and see. Perhaps the situation is not as bad as I thought. Even if we have to return to the 9 regions, we have the Tianji pillar and can retreat at any time. Li Baxian nodded slightly. It was as he thought. In the current situation, they indeed only had 2 choices. Leave immediately or wait until the situation worsened to a certain extent. No matter what, they would not be able to keep this spiritual land. In the end, it was still a pity. A-grade spiritual land was extremely rare. They had only cultivated here for a few months and had stayed in Fox Immortal Valley for more than a month. Then let's wait. Perhaps, as junior brother said, the situation is not that bad? Li Baxian said. Then let's wait. With the Tianji pillar, they could leave at any time. Their safety was still guaranteed. The 2 set the tone with a few words. Feng Yuechan and Giant Armor did not speak. When Li Baxian spoke, Feng Yuechan only listened quietly and never interrupted him. As for Giant Armor, this guy was a taciturn person and rarely spoke. But before that, Lu Yi looked at Giant Armor. The wolf pack has to leave first. The few of them could use the Pillar of Heavenly Fate to return to the 9 prefectures, but the wolf pack couldn't. Once the situation worsened to the point of no return and they left, the wolf pack would definitely become the target to vent their anger. At that time, the wolf pack would be doomed. Although leaving the wolf pack behind could ensure the protection of the spiritual land, if the cultivators from the Myriad Devil's Ridge were to really take action, they would definitely come with an absolute crushing force. The wolf pack could withstand the attack of the cultivators from the Holy Eve spiritual land, but they definitely could not withstand the danger that they might face next. I'll leave this matter to you. Get the wolves out of here within 3 days. Giant Shell answered in a muffled voice, okay. After a brief discussion, the 4 of them dispersed and went about their own business. Lu Yi did not need to worry about how Giant Armor would make the wolf pack leave first. The reason why the wolf pack stayed in the spiritual land was because of Giant Armor. Moreover, the alpha wolf had extremely high intelligence. After the previous battle, the alpha wolf had obviously realized some things. As long as it was not too stupid, it would know that leaving this place early was the only way to protect the pack. Lu Yi began to refine a large number of array flags. Previously, when the cultivators from the Holy Eve spiritual land attacked the spiritual land, many of the array formations were destroyed. Naturally, they needed to be replenished. Now that his strength and foundation had greatly increased, the speed at which he refined array flags was also much faster. After consuming a lot of resources, array flags were freshly produced. After rearranging the damaged array, he added more array formations to the spiritual land. Under the lead of the alpha wolf, the wolf pack left. However, they did not go too far, only staying at a position 200 to 300 miles deeper into the Taimeng Mountains. Obviously, they were ready to return to the spiritual land at any time. Time flew by. A few days later, in the sky above the spiritual land, Lu Ye's figure shuttled back and forth, checking the many array formations that he had set up. With so many array formations, it should be enough. Although he had told Li Baxin that they only had 2 ways out, there was actually another way. However, he did not intend to tell Li Baxin about it. It was not that he wanted to hide it, but if he said it, Li Baxin would definitely not agree. However, if this method could be successfully implemented, then the spiritual land could be saved. At that time, Li Baxin, Feng Yuechan, and Giant Armor could cultivate here in peace. It was indeed a pity to abandon or drop a grade to spiritual land. The large number of array formations that Lu Yi had set up now was not to deal with the invading enemies. If the situation was really as bad as he had guessed, then it would be meaningless no matter how many array formations he set up in the spiritual land. He left these array formations behind only to increase the defensive capabilities of the spiritual land. After a round of inspection, there were many layers of array formations in the spiritual land. The protection was impregnable. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi lowered his head to check it. The message came from someone he did not expect. Shin Kitten. Lu Yi did not know what this woman's real name was, but the name Shin Kitten sounded fake, just like his Yi Lu. However, ever since they lost the Grade C spiritual land, Lu Yi and Shin Kitten parted ways. The latter went somewhere unknown, and they had never contacted each other these days. He did not expect that she would actually send him a message, and the content of the message surprised Lu Yi. Run, a lot of people are heading towards you, a lot. A lot. It was a simple sentence, but she used a lot. Obviously it was a lot. From this, it could be seen that the location of the spiritual land was completely exposed. At this moment, there should be a large number of myriad Devil Ridge cultivators rushing over here. It could even be said that there were already people lurking nearby. For Shin Kitten to send him such a message at this time, the amount of information contained was not small. First of all, how did Shin Kitten know that a lot of people were coming this way? The exposure of the spiritual land's location must only be circulated within the myriad Devil Ridge camp. It was impossible for the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance to know. Even Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan did not receive any warning. The 2 of them had a much wider network than Lu Yi. If the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance camp knew this news, they would definitely send a message to warn the 2 of them. But the current situation was that Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan did not receive any news. Instead, it was Shin Kitten who sent a warning to Lu Yi. The fact that Shin Kitten knew this in itself explained a lot of things. Shin Kitten must have known that Yi Lu was Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect long ago. After all, Lu Ye's image was spread everywhere in the myriad Devil Ridge. Many cultivators had seen his image. Lu Yi did not know why Shin Kitten sent him such a message, but he could feel that the other party had good intentions. Perhaps it was because they had cultivated in the same spiritual land, or because they had lived and died together in the secret realm of beasts, or even because she had followed Lu Yi to sell things in the Tianji treasure house and obtained great benefits. Anyway, no matter what, to send this message at this time showed that this girl's heart was not bad. When Lu Yi first stepped into the cultivation world, he thought that the people of the myriad Devil Ridge were all heinous people. He even thought that the Grand Heaven Alliance represented good and the myriad Devil Ridge represented evil. But as he continued to understand the situation of the cultivation world of the 9 regions, he found that there was no such thing as good or evil in this world. There were only 2 opposing camps. He simply replied, "Got it? Thank you." Shin Kitten did not say anything else. Sending a message to Lu Yi as soon as she received the news was already the limit of what she could do. If she revealed more information, it would only make her conscience suffer. Speaking of which, the sect behind her had also been blackmailed by Lu Yi, even though Lu Yi did not know which sect she came from. Returning to his wooden house, Lu Yi fell into deep thought. Things were still developing in a bad direction. There was nothing he could do. 9 out of 10 things did not go his way. Suddenly a strange feeling came. Lu Yi quickly opened the spirit beast bag. A snow-white figure immediately rushed out of it, shaking its head. It was Hu Pe, who had been sleeping for many days. This guy finally woke up. Lu Yi. Yi's cheers came out. She flashed out of Hu Po's body and threw herself into Lu Ye's arms. She hugged his waist with both hands and buried her head in his chest. Her black hair spread out. Lu Ye's raised hand paused in midair. He had known Yi for so long. They were inseparable, but Yi rarely made intimate movements to him, let alone hugging him like this. Slowly lowering his big hand, Lu Yi gently embraced her petite body and gently patted her back. Yi was actually very afraid of falling into that state of silence. Although she had never told Lu Yi about it, Lu Yi could feel it. Once she fell into that state of silence, it was as if her entire being was wrapped in endless darkness. Even her thoughts became incomparably sluggish. In such an environment, the passage of time was already difficult to perceive. To her, it was like a nightmare that she would never wake up from. She was afraid that she would never wake up from this dream, never see the light again, never see the person she wanted to see again. "It's all right," Lu Yi comforted her softly. After a long time, Yi broke free from his arms, her face flushed red as she glanced over at Lu Yi and stomped her foot. "Don't laugh at me." "I didn't," Lu Yi said seriously. "How could I laugh at you?" Saying so, he raised his hand and pinched her cheek, trying to feel it. Smooth and delicate, not bad at all. Yi took a step back to escape from his demonic grasp, her cheeks puffed up in anger. "Has your cultivation increased?" Lu Yi asked. Yi thought for a moment and said, "It might be equivalent to the 5th order Cloud River realm." The increase in Yi's strength was directly linked to Hu Po's growth. The stronger Hu Po was, the stronger she would be. Previously, in Fox Immortal Valley, the strength of the spirit and tiger had greatly increased, allowing them to break through a minor realm. Now, with the monster core of an overlord-grade monster beast, they had taken another step forward. This kind of cultivation was already on par with him. Checking Hu Po next to him, he found that this was indeed the case. The spirit and tiger were equivalent to the 5th order Cloud River realm. To be continued. Chapter 6:15. Hu Po's awakening and the increase in the strength of one spirit and one tiger were undoubtedly the only good news recently. Yi had the 9 front formation in her hands. The stronger she was, the more power she could unleash from the 9 front formation. For example, if Yi had been able to unleash more of the 9 front formation's power, Lu Yi might not have had to work so hard. On the other hand, Hu Po and Lu Yi had formed a life origin technique and a beast mark technique. In battle, Lu Yi could borrow strength from Hu Po, and once the beast transformation secret technique was activated, the stronger Hu Po was, the higher Lu Ye's limit would be. It could be said that Hu Po's increase in strength was equivalent to Lu Ye's increase in strength. These 2 companions were rare helpers by Lu Ye's side. In the entire cultivation world of the 9 provinces, they were unique. Recently, there were traces of cultivators outside the heavenly spirit land. Obviously, they were cultivators from the myriad Devil Ridge who had received the news and rushed here first. However, it was still early, so not many people came. It could be foreseen that as time passed, more and more cultivators would rush here. Although these cultivators had received news about Lu Yi, they didn't dare to act rashly before confirming it. They only secretly investigated the surroundings of the heavenly spirit land. Unfortunately, the heavenly spirit land was shrouded in a concealment array. No matter how they investigated, they couldn't find any clues. It wasn't until several days later that a cultivator finally couldn't bear it anymore. He flew straight to the sky above Heavenly Spirit Valley and raised his hand to cast a spell downward. As the spiritual power surged, the concealment array lost its effect. In an instant, the situation of the entire Heavenly Spirit Land was imprinted in everyone's eyes. There were several wooden houses scattered about, and a spirit spring was gurgling out of it. In front of one of the wooden houses, a person was casually sitting on the floor with a long saber beside his leg. His gaze was indifferent as he looked at the figure in the sky. For eyes met. The spell cultivator who cast the spell observed with rapt attention. He was overjoyed. Wuxia. Although they had rushed here based on the news they had received, no one could be sure whether this was Wuxia's hiding place unless they saw his whereabouts with their own eyes. At this moment, when the concealment array disappeared and Wuxia's figure was truly revealed, the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge were all excited to see him, whether they were in the open or in the dark. The news was true. This was indeed where Wuxia was hiding. Just as the spell cultivator was getting excited, more than 10 figures hiding in the dark flew over. Now that he had found Wuxia's whereabouts, he naturally had to strike first to gain the advantage. There was only one Wuxia, and whoever killed him would get the reward. However, not everyone charged out. Most of them chose to observe. In the spiritual land, Wuxia raised his hand and pointed his palm at the magic cultivator hovering in the air. Wuxia was still immersed in the joy of discovering Wuxia's whereabouts. When he saw Wuxia's actions, he had no idea what Wuxia was going to do. Just as he was puzzled, Wuxia suddenly clenched his hand. It was as if he had imperceptibly grasped Wuxia's entire body in his palm. Then he waved his hand and said indifferently, "Get down here." The moment he finished speaking, the spell cultivator who was suspended in midair felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him. He was like a bird with broken wings falling straight down in shock. The sudden turn of events caused him to panic. He cried out in alarm and madly urged his spiritual power to stabilize his body. However, at this moment, the clear sound of a sword rang out. Flying swords flew out from another wooden hut. Wrapped in an icy chi of death, they accurately attacked the magic cultivator who was dancing with joy. Thud, thud, thud. The spell cultivator's protective spiritual power lasted for less than a breath before it was broken. The flying swords pierced through, causing blood to spurt out. Miserable screams echoed endlessly in Huitian Valley. Plop! The spell cultivator fell to the ground but did not die immediately. His mouth and nose were full of blood and many of his bones were broken. There were more than 10 flying swords piercing through his body. Before he could regain his senses, a shadow covered him. He opened his blurry eyes and saw that Wuxia, who had been sitting in front of the house, had unknowingly walked in front of him and was looking down at him. The spell cultivator was terrified. He instinctively wanted to urge his spiritual power, but Wuxia stepped on his chest. The heavy blow caused him to spit out blood, and the spiritual power he had painstakingly gathered dissipated. Wuxia raised his saber. The pitch-black mountain saber flashed with a sharp luster. "Wait!" the spell cultivator whispered. But before he could say anything, the saber had already stabbed down. The saber pierced through his chest and came out from his back, directly taking his life. The spell cultivator's body twitched a few times before he stopped breathing. Wuxia bent down and took the spell cultivator's storage bag. Then he kicked the corpse out of the spirit land. He shook off the blood on his mountain saber and coldly looked at the dozen figures floating in the distance. When they met his gaze, their scalps went numb. Although the spell cultivator who attacked just now had only used one technique from the spiritual power fluctuations around him, he was a 9th-order spell cultivator. A 9th-order spell cultivator was the limit of the Cloud River battlefield. He could be considered a master anywhere. However, such an expert had actually died here without knowing what had happened. From beginning to end, other than someone using their flying sword to help, Wuxia had only used one saber strike. Naturally, they didn't think that the 9th-order spell cultivator had died at Wuxia's hands. He had died so miserably because he had been too careless. Recalling what had happened to the spell cultivator, someone frowned and whispered, "A space sealing array." It didn't make sense for a 9th-order spell cultivator to suddenly fall down. There was no other explanation other than a space sealing array. They had long heard that Wuxia's attainments in the Tao of arrays were extremely high, but they didn't expect him to be so high that he could even arrange a space sealing array. The news they received didn't mention the existence of a space sealing array. When Tu Guanxiong spread the news, he didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but he omitted this information. The dozen or so 10,000 Demon's Ridge cultivators who had rushed over were now filled with joy. Fortunately, they weren't fast enough. Otherwise, once they entered the range of the space sealing array, they would have followed in the spell cultivator's footsteps. As for why Wuxia didn't wait for them to enter the range of the space sealing array before activating it, it was understandable. It wasn't that he didn't want to do so, but that he didn't dare. Using the opportunity created by the space sealing array, it wouldn't be difficult to kill a ninth order spell cultivator, but if a dozen or so people were to break in, even if he could kill a few of them, the rest would be troublesome. The current situation was the best way to deal with it. Killing one person would deter the rest. The death of a ninth order spell cultivator made the rest not dare to act rashly. Glancing at the dozen or so people indifferently, Lu Yi raised his hand and the concealment array activated again. With a ripple, the entire spirit land disappeared from everyone's sight. The dozen or so people looked at each other for a while, then silently retreated. Although a ninth order spell cultivator had died inexplicably, the news that Lu Yi was hiding here had been confirmed. Moreover, some people saw the traces of Li Baxian and Feng Yuchan. The flying sword that had attacked the spell cultivator was controlled by Li Baxian. The news continued to spread, and the outside of returning Sky Valley gradually became lively. Usually there was no one here, but now, there was a hubbub of voices and traces of cultivators could be seen everywhere. Some cultivators who were familiar with each other gathered in groups of 3 or 5, discussing how to kill Lu Yi safely and effectively to obtain the huge bounty. There were also masters who were arrogant and isolated, looking around coldly. The cultivators of the Holy Eve Spirit Land returned under Mingzhe's lead, but they didn't gather together. Instead, they were divided into several teams and scattered around. Looking at the bustling entrance of returning Sky Valley, Mingzhe sighed and let out a long breath. He was heartbroken that the Holy Eve Spirit Land had suffered too many losses before, and even his senior brother Huo Liao Yuan had died at the hands of Lu Yi. But now, more than 300 cultivators had gathered from all over the Myriad Demon's Ridge, and those who dared to come here were all 6th order cultivators and above. With such a force, even if they just pushed their way through, Lu Yi would definitely not be able to resist. He would definitely die. As such, senior brother Huo could rest in peace. Looking in the direction of returning Sky Valley, Mingzhe's eyes were filled with joy, as if he was about to get his revenge. However, the development of the situation was somewhat different from what he had expected. More and more Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators gathered here, and there were even many 9th order masters from 1st grade sects and 1st grade sects, but no one attacked returning Sky Valley. Everyone seemed to have secretly reached a tacit understanding, and they were all watching. Mingzhe gradually came to his senses. The Holy Eve Spiritual Land no longer had any hopes of obtaining the bounty on Lu Yi's head. They only wanted to kill with a borrowed knife and avenge their dead brothers. However, the cultivators who had rushed over for the sake of profit were different. Every one of them had their eyes on the huge bounty. After learning that returning Sky Valley was shrouded in a space-restricting array, no one dared to act rashly. Lu Yi could even arrange a space-restricting array, so who knew what other strange spirit arrays he had in his spirit land. At this time, whoever stood out would be unlucky. To put it simply, everyone's hearts were not united. They all hoped that others would make the first move to test the heritage of returning Sky Valley, so that they could secretly pick up the scraps. Mingzhe was angry at first. They clearly had the power to flatten everything, but they schemed against each other, which was really disappointing. But on second thought, he could understand the mentality of these masters. After all, they did not have that much hatred with Lu Yi. Moreover, the bounty on Lu Yi's head was so huge that they had to be careful in order to increase their success rate. But if this continued, how could they kill Lu Yi? Mingzhe's worries were obviously unnecessary. How could others not think of what he could think of? Just as he was worrying about gains and losses, a figure suddenly stood up and flew into the air, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Chapter 616. The one who stood out was a man who looked to be in his 20s, but the spirit energy fluctuations on his body were already at the level of a Cloud River Realm 9th order. Being able to have such a cultivation at such a young age undoubtedly meant that his background and aptitude were extremely good. The man was handsome and had an extraordinary temperament. What was rare was that he didn't have the slightest bit of arrogance and aloofness of someone from a big sect. Instead, his face easily gave people a kind of amiable feeling. The faint smile on his face made people feel like they were bathing in a spring breeze. He flew into the air and hovered about 10 feet above the ground. Seeing that he had attracted the attention of the nearby cultivators, he spoke in a gentle tone. "Fellow cultivators from all over the 9 states, Song Jure greets you." As he said this, he turned in a circle with his hands clasped in front of him, looking very polite. Immediately, a soft whisper came from somewhere in the crowd. "It's Song Jure from Abyss Rainbow Hall." In the cultivation world of the 9 states, there were new talents in every generation, and the new generation replaced the old. There were so many cultivators present. Some might not know who Song Jue was, but everyone knew about Abyss Rainbow Hall. After all, it was a first-grade sect. When Lu Yi had just stepped into the cultivation world, a woman had told him that the top 10 first-grade sects of the War Province were divided into 1 palace, 2 temples, 3 sects and 4 sects. Abyss Rainbow Hall was one of the 2 temples. As a disciple of Abyss Rainbow Hall who was active in the Cloud River battlefield, Song Jue was actually quite famous, but after all, not everyone knew him. However, it didn't matter whether they knew him or not. He was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order and a disciple of Abyss Rainbow Hall. These 2 identities were enough. With a warm smile still on his face, Song Jue opened his mouth and said, "Fellow Taoists, you have all rushed here from all over the battlefield." This Song Jue won't go into detail as everyone is well aware of the reason. This Song Jue is fortunate enough to stand here today and only wishes to say a few words of criticism. The smile on his face slowly disappeared and he became serious. Since ancient times, in the spiritual stream battlefield, the Yunhe battlefield, and even the cultivation world of the 9 states, the Wanmo Ridge and the Haotian Alliance have been fighting against each other. It's understandable that the cultivators each have their own standpoints. For so many years, the blood feud between them has been like the east wind suppressing the west wind, and the west wind suppressing the east wind. There has never been a clear winner. But ever since Lu Yi appeared in the Jade Blood sect, the situation seemed to have changed subtly. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, many fellow Taoists from the Myriad Devil Ridge died because of him. Many sects suffered heavy losses because of him, especially the Inner Circle and the Core Circle. I heard that dozens of sects in the Inner Circle were destroyed by him. I didn't dare to believe it, but it happened. Then there's the Core Circle. The sects stationed in the Core Circle are all grade 3 and above. Each sect has a large number of talents. In the past, it might not be possible to destroy a single grade 3 sect's encampment in several years. However, since Lu Yi stepped into the Core Circle, he has destroyed dozens of Core Circle encampments. Twice in a row, the Core Circle sects were forced to pay up to avoid disaster. At this point, Song Jue's face was filled with grief and indignation, and his expression became agitated. To tell you the truth, this song comes from Abyss Rainbow Hall. Perhaps many of the fellow Taoists present here belong to one of them. This is a disgrace to us, a disgrace to the entire Myriad Devil Ridge camp. The large sects in the Core Circle had been extorted by Lu Yi twice and were forced to pay him for their safety. Although this was not a secret, few Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators spoke of it in public. They couldn't afford to lose face. But today Song Jue spoke of this matter unscrupulously, and the effect was surprisingly good. Many people in the crowd listened with gloomy expressions. Cultivators were sect cultivators, and sects were the face of cultivators. How could cultivators remain indifferent when their sects were humiliated? It could be said that some of the Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators gathered here were here for the bounty on Lu Ye's head, but more were driven by hatred. We are all indebted to our sects and have been carefully taught and cultivated by our elders to achieve what we have today. When our junior brothers and sisters were bullied, we were not there. When our sects were humiliated, we were not there. When our sects were forced to compromise, we were still not there. Song Jue's voice gradually became louder, and the warm smile on his face had long been replaced by a resonant anger. He waved his hand and shouted in a low voice, "We can't interfere in the matters of the Spirit Stream battlefield. But this is the Cloud River battlefield and Lu Yi is here." He suddenly pointed in the direction of Huitian Valley. "He's there. He's looking at us from there and laughing at us. He's laughing at us for scheming against each other even though we have the numbers. He's laughing at us for not taking the initiative to step forward despite having the power to flatten everything. He's laughing at us for being a plate of loose sand." In the crowd below, Mingzher's blood was boiling as he listened. He clenched his fists and wished he could cheer loudly. Song Jue's words had spoken to the bottom of his heart. He suddenly realized that it was not that there were no sensible people in Myriad Devil Ridge. On the contrary, many people were clear in their hearts. They just lacked a leader. Now that Song Jue had stepped forward and become the leader, there was hope that the cultivators of Myriad Devil Ridge could unite as one. That was a rope of hatred that could whip the entire Huitian Valley and Lu Yi into pieces. Song Jue let out a long breath and his high-pitched voice calmed down. He said slowly, "Fellow Taoists, I know that Lu Yi has a huge bounty on his head. Even if anyone only has 10% or even 5% of this bounty, it's enough to enjoy for a lifetime. But there's only one Lu Yi, and so many of us have come this time. As the saying goes, we don't worry about scarcity, but we worry about uneven distribution. I understand the worries in many of your hearts, but what I want to say is, are we just going to watch and be on guard against each other, and let Wuxia laugh at us from inside? If that's the case, then what future will Myriad Devil Ridge have in the future? Someone immediately said, Senior Brother Song, since you've stepped forward, how about you take command of the operation? We'll all listen to your orders, and I think the other fellow Taoists won't be unwilling. Yes, Senior Brother Song will take command. We'll listen to Senior Brother Song's orders. Voices of agreement could be heard from all over the crowd. Song Jure's face was brimming with a smile again, and he cupped his fists again. Thank you for your support. Since I've taken the initiative to step forward, I also have this intention. After all, we can't just wait like this forever. Of course, if any of you feel that it's inappropriate, you can speak frankly. I'm not a narrow-minded person. The atmosphere had been set to such an extent that no one dared to stand up and refute Song Jure. At this time, standing up and refuting Song Jure would only cause public anger. Moreover, Song Jure's cultivation and background were all there. Even if there were people whose cultivation was not inferior to his, it was impossible for them to embarrass him at this time. He raised his hand slightly and pressed it twice, and the noise gradually subsided. Song Jure continued, Wuxia is going to die, and this spiritual land is going to be destroyed. However, I'm not doing this for the bounty, but to eradicate a disaster for the myriad demons rich. I've specially studied Wuxia. Although his cultivation is still low, he has done many things that no one has been able to do since ancient times. When he was at the Spirit Stream battlefield, he stirred up the entire battlefield. Now that he's at the Cloud River battlefield, although he hasn't done anything too shocking, it can be seen from the hunting ground that if he doesn't die, he will definitely become a huge problem for the myriad demons ridge in the future. I think your sects don't want to see him grow, or else they wouldn't have issued so many bounties. Also, according to the various information I've obtained, Wuxia has set up many formations in this spiritual land, especially the Forbidden Sky formation. A fellow Taoist lost his life because of it a few days ago. In addition, there are nearly 300 demon wolves in this spiritual land, and they can't be underestimated. Of course, with so many of us, we already have enough power to crush them. However, I want to remind everyone that you must still be careful. Although the bounty is good, you still need to be alive to enjoy it. As for the bounty after killing Wuxia, I'll calculate it in advance. All the fellow Taoists who participate in this matter will share Wuxia's bounty equally. Of course, I need someone to help me. If there's a clever junior sister who's willing to help me, you can come and find me. As soon as he said this, many people were shocked. They really didn't expect Song Jure to make such a decision. Wuxia's bounty was indeed huge, but if it was divided equally among so many people present, it was nothing. At most, it could be considered a windfall. It was better than nothing. Moreover, Song Jure was right. The main purpose of killing Wuxia this time was not for the bounty, but to eradicate a disaster for the myriad demons rich. The bounty was secondary. Moreover, with so many people acting together, there was basically no risk. The bounty was given for free. At the entrance of Huitian Valley, the scattered cultivators of the myriad demons ridge gathered their hearts because of Song Jure's words. Although some of them were unwilling, it was difficult for them to resist the general trend. Song Jure said a few more words, but it was nothing more than exhorting the cultivators of the myriad demons ridge to pay attention to protect themselves. This made everyone feel that he was a good person. After Song Jure landed, a few female cultivators took the initiative to find him. With Song Jure's arrangement, the female cultivators excitedly began to count the names, backgrounds, and even sects of the cultivators who participated in the attack on Huitian Valley. Although there were many cultivators of the myriad demons ridge, the efficiency of the female cultivators was very high. In less than an hour, a few jade slips appeared in front of Song Jure. He smiled warmly at the female cultivators. Junior sisters, you've worked hard. The female cultivators had different reactions. Some smiled, some were shy and silent, and some took the initiative to exchange battlefield imprints with Song Jure. Song Jure naturally agreed. After dealing with the female cultivators, Song Jure checked the contents of the jade slips. A voice suddenly sounded beside him. Don't you feel guilty for doing this? There was only the voice and no figure. Even if someone passed by Song Jure, he didn't notice anything. Song Jure lowered his head and his mouth moved slightly. You're definitely not the only ghost cultivator hiding. You'd better not let others succeed. Ingwuji, I joined forces with you because I trusted you. I also tried my best to encourage this group of people. Don't let me down. Chapter 617. If the cultivators of the Cloud River battlefield were to be ranked on a list, Lu Yi would definitely be at the top of the list. As early as in the Spirit Stream battlefield, his actions had even attracted the attention of many Spirit Sea Realm cultivators. The huge bounty issued by the major sects of the Myriad Devil Mountain Range made most of the cultivators in 9 regions have heard of Lu Ye's name. After Lu Yi there were Li Baxin and Feng Yuchan. Perhaps in the entire cultivation world of the 9 states, their fame was not too outstanding, but in the Cloud River battlefield they were still very famous. After all, which of these Cloud River realm cultivators had not come from the Spirit Stream realm? Which one of them had not looked up to these 2 malignant tumors of the Spirit Stream battlefield? Below them were cultivators like Song Jue, who had a good background, a good cultivation and a little fame. Yingwu Ji could also be considered in this level. Although very few people had seen his true face, many people had heard of his name, especially the cultivators of the 10,000 Demon Ridge, and especially the ghost cultivators, because just 2 months ago, Yingwu Ji used his Cloud River 9th Order cultivation to kill a true Lake Realm cultivator in the War Province's chaotic sky plains. Killing a true Lake Realm cultivator in the Cloud River battlefield was a magnificent feat. Although the true Lake Realm cultivator had been injured, when the news spread, it was still shocking. This was no longer a matter of killing an enemy above one's realm, but killing an enemy above one's realm. Looking at the history of the 9 states, there were countless cultivators who could kill an enemy above their realm, but there were very few who could do so. The main reason Yingwu Ji could do this was because he was a ghost cultivator. Moreover, he was a ghost cultivator from the Senluo Temple. The War Province had 10 first-grade sects, 1 palace, 2 temples, 3 sects, and 4 sections. One of the 2 temples was the Yuanhong Temple that Song Jue came from, and the other was the Senluo Temple that Yingwu Ji came from. The Senluo Temple was a very special sect. 70 to 80% of the cultivators in the sect were ghost cultivators. It was also the most difficult sect to deal with in the 9 states. For example, the North Profound Sword sect and the Wild Saber sect only cultivated in one field generation after generation to reach the peak. These 2 sects were indeed powerful, but their strength was on the surface. But Senluo Hall was different. No one knew what kind of resources Senluo Hall had because the ghost cultivators were all hiding in the dark. There was a saying in the cultivation world that if a cultivator provoked another first-rank sect, they might still have a chance of survival. However, if they were targeted by the Senluo Temple, then they would have no chance of survival. Song Jue and Yingwu Ji were both cultivators from the military province and from the Myriad Demons Ridge. They were of similar age and cultivation base. Naturally, Song Jue and Yingwu Ji had contacted each other privately. He stood up and spoke so vehemently. On the surface he seemed to be righteous and selfless, but in fact he was just trying to encourage the cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge. After all, according to the information he received, the defense of Lu Ye's spiritual land was still very strong. Only by reorganizing the forces of the Myriad Devil Ridge would they have a chance to break through the defense of Lu Ye's spiritual land. When the time came, he would lead the Myriad Demon Ridge cultivators to attack. On the surface, he would attract Lu Ye's attention while Yingwu Ji hid in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. After killing Lu Yi, he would split the bounty with Yingwu Ji. The entire plan would be done in secret and the chances of success were extremely high. I'll do it, don't worry. Yingwu Ji's voice drifted over, but I want 60%. Song Jue indifferently said, give me a reason. I'll bear the infamy. If he really did steal Lu Ye's head under the noses of so many Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators, he would definitely incur their wrath. Moreover, this kind of thing couldn't be concealed at all. When the time came to collect the bounty from the various sects, it would be obvious who killed Lu Yi. The Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators who had their heads stolen might not dare to offend Yingwu Ji, but they could still curse him in private. This was something that was bound to happen. You're just a ghost cultivator who hides his head and shows his tail, yet you're still afraid of being cursed? Words are like knives to the heart. If too many people curse me, I'll be very sad. I don't care, I want 60%. You'll be stuffed to death. Song Jue snapped, as you wish. 50 to 60% wasn't much of a difference, so Song Jue didn't bother to dwell on this issue. Then hurry up and act, I can't wait any longer. Yingwu Ji urged. A moment later, the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators moved quickly and effectively under Song Jue's command. Hundreds of cultivators moved in groups. The strong body cultivators stood at the front, behind them were the murderous weapon cultivators, and behind them were the ghost cultivators and dharma cultivators. Under Song Jue's arrangement, the group of cultivators was divided into 9 groups, forming an arrow formation, and majestically moving toward the heavenly spirit land. In the heavenly spirit land, Li Baxian, Feng Yuechan, and Giant Armor stood beside Lu Yi, looking up in the direction of the valley entrance with solemn expressions. With such a lineup from the myriad demons' ridge, their side absolutely couldn't resist. Not to mention that the wolf pack had been driven out. Even if the wolf pack stayed behind, it was impossible to defeat the other side. In the end, they still had to escape back to the 9 regions. But what made Li Baxian feel strange was that his junior brother didn't seem to have the intention to immediately escape back to the 9 regions. He still stood there quietly. He didn't know what Lu Ye's plan was, but he knew that his junior brother was no longer the junior brother who needed his protection when they first met. After several years of growth, his junior brother had become independent. The myriad demons' ridge cultivators pressed toward the heavenly spirit land bit by bit. Song Jue's shouts spread in all directions, "Fellow Taoists, be careful. Don't step into the range of the other party's heavenly spirit land. I'll repeat again, there's a forbidden space formation in the heavenly spirit land. Later we'll attack together and break the protective formation here. Then listen to my command." Song Jue's previous efforts were still very effective. Excluding some ghost cultivators who were hiding in the dark, the cultivators on the surface were very respectful at this moment. After all, they couldn't take the reward for killing Lu Yi alone. Naturally, there was no need to take the risk. It was safer to move together with the group. Of the 9 groups of people, Song Jue personally led one group and flew at the front. When they were about the right distance, Song Jue raised his hand and all the cultivators stopped. He raised his hand and shot out imperial equipment. The imperial equipment's flowing light seemed to penetrate a layer of invisible boundary. As ripples spread, the concealment formation's effect was broken. The situation in the heavenly spirit land was imprinted in everyone's vision. A few wooden houses were scattered, and a spirit spring was very conspicuous. In front of one of the wooden houses, 4 figures stood. Although the figure standing at the back was unusually tall and sturdy, Song Jue's gaze was immediately attracted to Lu Yi, who was standing in front. He frowned slightly and a trace of surprise flashed across his face. The situation was a little different from what he had imagined. At the same time, the myriad demons' ridge cultivators also discovered that the heavenly spirit land in front of them had no protective formation. Or rather, the protective formation had not been activated. The entire heavenly spirit land appeared in their vision without any protection. Moreover, they didn't see any traces of the rumored hundreds of demon wolves. What did this mean? Song Jue's gaze swept across the heavenly spirit land. He didn't see any traces of demon wolves, but that didn't mean there weren't any. Since Lu Yi could arrange a concealment formation to hide the entire heavenly spirit land, hiding a few demon wolves naturally wouldn't be a problem. Song Jue was sure that if they dared to set foot in the heavenly spirit land, those hidden demon wolves would attack from all directions. He had seen through this little trick at a glance. It was like showing off one's slight skill in front of an expert. However, although the situation was unexpected, it made it easier for Ing Wuji to act in secret. Originally, he and Ing Wuji's plan was for him to lead people to break through the protective formation of the heavenly spirit land. Then Ing Wuji would take the opportunity to sneak in and kill Lu Yi. Now that the other party hadn't even activated the protective formation, wouldn't Ing Wuji be able to enter unhindered? Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Song Jue's signature warm smile appeared on his face. He looked at Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan behind Lu Yi and slowly said, "Fellow Taoist Li, fellow Taoist Feng, after so many years, you're still as elegant as ever." When Song Jue was at the Spirit Stream battlefield, he was ranked 3rd on the Spirit Stream list. This was the highest ranking a cultivator could achieve during the reign of the Heavenly Spirit Stream list's 3 malignant tumors. The first was Feng Yuechan and the second was Yan Xing. No matter which one it was, none of the cultivators who came later could contend against them. As experts on the Heavenly Spirit Stream list, Song Jue, Li Baxian, and Feng Yuechan naturally knew each other. Li Baxian ignored him. Since they were in different camps, there was no need to be polite. She only whispered to Lu Yi, "Song Jue from the Deep Rainbow Hall is very strong. At the very least, he's on the same level as Xiao Yang. Don't be fooled by his sunny appearance. He's actually very scheming." Lu Yi nodded slightly. He knew how strong Xiao Yang was. For this guy to be on the same level as Xiao Yang, he was obviously very strong. The Deep Rainbow Hall. Lu Yi suddenly remembered. Wasn't that the rank 1 heavenly spirit stream in the War Province? As for Li Baxian's evaluation of Song Jure, it was undoubtedly that this guy was two-faced. However, it didn't matter. Lu Yi didn't need to play any tricks with them. Today's confrontation was an open and above-board scheme. Since Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan ignored him, Song Jure didn't mind. He looked at Lu Yi and said, "Fellow Taoist Lu from the Jade Blood sect, I've heard a lot about you. Song Jure greets you." Saying so, he politely bowed to Lu Yi. Lu Yi casually cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist Song has come from afar. Why don't you come in for a chat? If word of you standing outside and talking to me were to spread, I'm afraid that cultivators from the Jade Blood sect would think that we don't know how to treat our guests." Song Jure laughed. "Fellow Taoist Lu must be joking. There's no need to go in for a chat. I've long heard that fellow Taoist Lu has extremely high attainments in the Tao of arrays. This Song doesn't want to fall into some kind of array." Although he was smiling on the surface, he coldly snorted in his heart. He was even more certain that there was some kind of earth-shattering array hidden in Lu Ye's spiritual land. As soon as they stepped in, it would activate and catch them off guard. How could that be? Lu Ye's expression was as calm as water. "Everyone who comes is a guest. I can't wait to welcome you. Why would I set up some heavenly net earth fiend array, shocking feather flying heaven array, or Sumeru formless sword array to deal with you? Heavenly net earth fiend array, shocking feather flying heaven array, Sumeru formless sword array, what kind of array were these?" The group of myriad demon ridge cultivators' eyelids twitched. When they looked at the spiritual land again, they only felt that it was full of danger and hidden killing intent. To be continued. Chapter 618. Song Jue laughed heartily. Seeing is believing. Fellow cultivator Lu is really interesting. Born in Abyss Rainbow Hall, he was well-read. Although he didn't cultivate array Dao, he more or less knew some basic things about array Dao. The few names that Lu Yi casually mentioned were all earth-shattering arrays. They were definitely not something that a Cloud River Realm cultivator could arrange. It was impossible for there to be such arrays in the spirit land in front of them. But whether there were other arrays, it was unknown. The other party had put on such an attitude of inviting them into a trap. Obviously he had nothing to fear. Is it interesting? Lu Yi lowered his eyes. Then let me show you something more interesting. As he spoke, an array flag suddenly appeared in his hand and he waved it gently. There was a loud bang, followed by flames soaring into the sky. Somewhere in the spirit land, along with the violent surge of spirit chi, a hidden figure suddenly appeared and was enveloped by the flames. He screamed miserably and quickly retreated. It was a ghost cultivator who was trying to sneak into the spirit land. This ghost cultivator was only a 6th order ghost cultivator, so it was unknown where he got the courage to do such a thing. At this moment, he was enveloped by the explosion array and his entire body was covered in flames. It was not easy for him to get out of the range of the explosion array, but he directly fell to the ground, gasping for breath. This sudden change shocked the group of myriad demon ridge cultivators. They all lowered their heads and looked at the ghost cultivator who had fallen to the ground. Before they could react, Lu Yi waved the array flag in his hand. Hong hong hong. Violent noises continuously rang out from various parts of the spiritual land. Streaks of fiery light rose and fell one after another. Every sound that rang out was accompanied by a cry of surprise or a scream of agony. Within every explosion array, there was the figure of a ghost cultivator. In a short time, more than a dozen explosion arrays were activated. More than a dozen ghost cultivators hiding in the dark were exposed. They were either killed or injured. The group of myriad demon ridge cultivators were dumbfounded. Although they knew that there would be ghost cultivators hiding in the dark, they didn't expect there to be so many of them. And this was just the exposed ones. What about those that weren't? This group of ghost cultivators were really incapable of doing anything right. What made them even more shocked was how many arrays Lu Yi had set up in the spirit land. Those ghost cultivators were scattered all over the spiritual land, but they still could not avoid the fate of being injured by the formation. Within the spiritual land, every step was filled with traps. In the sky, Song Jure frowned as he sized up the ghostly cultivators that had revealed themselves. Although he knew that with Endless Shadow's ability he wouldn't be exposed so easily, he was still a little worried. He swept his gaze over the dozen ghostly cultivators and didn't find any trace of Endless Shadow. Only then did he relax a little. Somewhere in the spiritual land, Ing Wuji was hiding in the shadows, slowly approaching Lu Ye's location. He was silent, not retreating even when his dozen or so companions were exposed. As an outstanding ghost cultivator, he naturally had some knowledge of the way of formations, especially the way of breaking formations. This was because there were many times when ghost cultivators needed to sneak into some formations to kill their targets. There was a saying in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures that a ghost cultivator who did not understand the Tao of arrays was not a qualified ghost cultivator. In the Spirit Stream tier and Cloud River tier, ghost cultivators didn't have high requirements for the Tao of formations. However, as their cultivation level increased, ghost cultivators also had higher requirements for the Tao of formations. This led to a bizarre phenomenon in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures. Some people appeared to be array masters on the surface, but were actually ghost cultivators who were proficient in concealment and assassination. In terms of attainments in the Tao of formations, Ing Wuji was inferior to Lu Yi, but he was different from those stupid ghost cultivators. He could more or less see some traces of formations, so along the way he didn't touch any formations at all. He didn't even step into the range of a formation. Is it beautiful? Lu Yi put down the formation flag in his hand. Song Jure took a deep breath and praised, I've long heard that fellow Taoist Lu has extremely high attainments in the Tao of formations. Now that I've seen it, it's really extraordinary. This song admires you. He had easily forced out the traces of more than a dozen ghostly cultivators. Under such a deterrent, the other ghost cultivators hiding in the dark wouldn't dare to act rashly. So, if he wanted to succeed, he would have to rely on Ing Wuji. Although the current situation was unexpected, it was what Song Jure wanted to see. He didn't need to do too much. He only needed to attract Lu Ye's attention here and create an opportunity for Ing Wuji to make a move. Once Ing Wuji made a move, Lu Ye would die without a doubt and the purpose of this trip would be achieved. Thinking of this, he slowly shook his head. But fellow Taoist Lu, forgive me for saying too much, but this is meaningless. Today hundreds of fellow Taoists from my myriad Devil Ridge have gathered here. I'm sure fellow Taoist Lu also understands why. Under such circumstances, does fellow Taoist Lu think you still have a chance of survival? It looks like I'm dead for sure? Song Jure said, does fellow Taoist Lu still have some unrealistic fantasies? Naturally, even ants want to live, let alone cultivators like us. It's reasonable that fellow Taoist Lu doesn't want to accept his fate, but is fellow Taoist Lu willing to implicate others because of his own matters? Lu Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. Song Jure continued, no matter how many formations fellow Taoist Lu has laid down in this spiritual land, since the cultivators of my myriad Devil Ridge have come here today, they won't return empty-handed. But if we force it, I'm afraid both of us will suffer losses. The biggest possibility is that we will pay a certain price and your side will be completely wiped out. He raised his eyebrows. Fellow Taoist Lu, how about I make a deal with you? The corners of Lu Ye's mouth suddenly curled up, revealing a trace of a smile. What a coincidence, I also want to make a deal with you. Song Jue was surprised. Oh? What kind of deal does fellow Taoist Lu want to make? Why don't you tell me? Tell me yours first. Song Jure didn't beat around the bush and said bluntly, as I said just now, if there is a conflict, both of us will have to pay the price. How about fellow Taoist Lu just surrender? Are you still asleep? Song Jure said, as long as fellow Taoist Lu is willing to surrender, I can make the decision to let the 3 companions behind you leave this place safely. If fellow Taoist Lu doesn't trust me, I can make a heavenly oath. So that's how it is. Lu Yi understood what he meant, a very sincere proposal. Using himself to ensure the safety of Li Baxian and the others. If Lu Yi really didn't have any backup plans, this was indeed a proposal worth considering. Of course, Li Baxian and the others definitely wouldn't agree. Then what does fellow Taoist Lu think? Lu Yi just opened his mouth when he suddenly turned his head to look to the side. The spiritual runes of insight instantly strengthened his eyes. Then he quickly raised the array flag in his hand and waved it down. He had done this before, which resulted in the explosion of more than 10 ghost cultivators. Now that he suddenly did this again, it was obvious that he had discovered traces of ghost cultivators. But this time, the hidden ghost cultivators were only 10 feet away from his position. This was already an extremely dangerous distance. And the only ghost cultivator who could sneak in to this extent under the previous deterrence was only Ing Wuji. When Lu Yi looked over, Ing Wuji's heart was filled with surprise. He instinctively felt that he had not been exposed, but Lu Ye's gaze was fixed on his position, so it was obvious that he had sensed something. How was this possible? 2 months ago, Even that true lake-stage cultivator didn't sense his approach. How could this Lu Ye detect him? He also didn't trigger any traces of spirit arrays, or was this guy's soul even stronger than the dead true lake-stage cultivator? In that instant, Ing Wuji reacted, his whole body turning into a black shadow as he rushed towards Lu Yi at an extremely fast speed. Although he wanted to sneak up to Lu Yi and kill him in one strike, since he had been exposed, he could only attack head-on. With a distance of 10 feet, it was impossible for a ninth-order cultivator to dodge. Lu Yi didn't dodge, he just waved the array flag in his hand. In the next instant, a curtain of light that covered an area of several meters appeared out of thin air, completely enveloping Ing Wuji. Ing Wuji's heart thumped. The moment he saw this light curtain, he realized that something was wrong because this light curtain gave him the feeling that it was an entrapment array. The next moment, his whole body was wrapped in a fierce aura as he slammed into the light curtain. Unsurprisingly, it was indeed an entrapment array, and even with his full strength as a ninth-order ghost cultivator, he was unable to break through it. A sense of horror flooded his body and mind, and inside the entrapment array, violent and chaotic spirit chi fluctuations surged as a bright burst of fire appeared in Ing Wuji's vision. Hong 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 hong. The explosion array erupted with power, and it wasn't just a single array. Just by looking at the movement, it was obvious there were at least 3 or 4 explosion arrays superimposed. And inside the entrapment array, the power of the explosion array was further amplified. Outside the spirit land, the eyes of many myriad demon ridge cultivators twitched. The scene was painful to watch. Amidst the flames, a muffled groan rang out. The light curtain of the entrapment array only lasted a breath of time before it broke. It wasn't that the entrapment array arranged by Lu Yi wasn't strong enough, but rather that even a powerful ghost cultivator like Ing Wuji couldn't break through it. It was just that the superimposed power of several explosion arrays had exceeded the limits of the entrapment array's light curtain. Almost at the moment the entrapment array's light curtain broke, a black shadow rushed out, but instead of rushing in Lu Ye's direction, it went in the opposite direction. The speed was far faster than before, and the surface of the black shadow was even covered in a thick layer of blood-red light. It was unknown what kind of secret technique it had used. The black shadow flashed and rushed out of returning Heaven Valley in the blink of an eye, disappearing without a trace. From beginning to end, no one saw his true appearance. Only Lu Yi vaguely saw something the moment the other party's figure was exposed. However, the other party was wearing a black cat mask on his face, so Lu Yi couldn't see his appearance. He could only infer from the spirit energy fluctuations that this person was a ninth-order ghost cultivator. In the sky, Song Jure watched this scene speechlessly. Ing Wuji failed. Not only did he fail, but he was also seriously injured. This was truly the biggest joke in the world. To be continued. Chapter 619. Song Jure knew about Ing Wuji's ability. He could kill true Lake Realm ghost cultivators. It was impossible for such a powerful ghost cultivator to fail when dealing with a 5th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator. However, Ing Wuji had escaped with serious injuries, which made Song Jue's originally confident plan disappear in an instant. How did Ing Wuji get exposed? Song Jue really couldn't figure it out. But it was meaningless to think about it now. Ing Wuji had escaped and could no longer be counted on. If he wanted to kill Lu Yi, he could only attack. In fact, Song Jure didn't want to do this because even if he killed Lu Yi, he wouldn't get many benefits in the end. At most, it would increase his fame and prestige. In the future, when the cultivators of Myriad Demon Ridge talked about Lu Yi, they would think that he died in an operation led by Song Jure. What use did fame and prestige have to him? Only practical resources were real benefits. The smile on Song Jure's face disappeared and his expression became serious. Only now did he realize that he seemed to have underestimated Lu Yi. Letting out a soft breath, Song Jure said, "My proposal just now, fellow Taoist Lu hasn't given an answer yet. I refuse." The resolute answer fell into his ears and Song Jure nodded slightly. As expected, if Lu Yi really agreed to such a thing he would be crazy. As Song Jue said before, even ants wanted to live, let alone cultivators. Then what is the deal that fellow Taoist Lu mentioned? The corner of Lu Ye's mouth rose slightly, showing a rare smile to a stranger, then raised his hand and waved gently. The space in front of him rippled and an object suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Song Jue's eyes narrowed and many Myriad Demon Ridge cultivators looked at the object that suddenly appeared in astonishment. It was something that no cultivator was unfamiliar with, something that everyone had encountered countless times. A low voice came from the crowd, "The Heaven's Fate Pillar." There was actually a Heaven's Secret Pillar in a small spiritual land, and from the looks of it, it had been there for a long time, but it had always been concealed by a spirit array, so no one had noticed it. It was only now that Lu Yi had taken the initiative to reveal it to everyone. What was there to play with? With the Tianji Pillar, Lu Yi and the others could use the Tianji Pillar to return to the 9 prefectures at any time. Even if there were thousands or tens of thousands of them, what could they do? Unless they could stop those people before they came into contact with the Tianji Pillar, but at this moment, many of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were still outside the range of the Spirit Land formation, so it was impossible for them to do such a thing. In other words, Lu Yi and the others could withdraw at any time. Song Jue finally came to his senses. No wonder Li Baxian and the others had been standing quietly behind Lu Yi without batting an eyelid. It turned out that they had something like this to rely on. At this moment, Song Jue felt that it was extremely laughable when he recalled his previous suggestions and words. His heart was filled with resentment. Previously, he had heard that Lu Yi had managed to summon a divine pillar from the hunting ground and managed to escape from the encirclement. Now, he had actually managed to summon another one from this spiritual land. This was something that was worth 100,000 merit points. While the vast majority of cultivators were still rushing about for tens of thousands of merit points, Lu Yi was able to invite the pillars of heavenly secrets one after another. He couldn't help but feel the same indignation as Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng. How rich was this dog? What made Song Jue feel even more resentful was that the person who had secretly leaked the information did not mention this matter at all. If he had known that there was a divine pillar in Lu Yi's spiritual land, he would have been more careful. He would have made sure to give Lu Yi a fatal blow before taking action, instead of leading hundreds of people to pressure him. This was Song Jue's misunderstanding. This time, the source of the information about Lu Yi's hiding place came from Tu Guanxiong of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. Tu Guanxiong also did not know that there was a divine pillar here. Back then, Xiao Liang had secretly mentioned this matter to Huo Liaoyuan, but Huo Liaoyuan relied on his death arena and did not care. In the end, Huo Liaoyuan died on the death arena and no one knew about this matter. The only people who knew about this matter were Xiao Liang and Tan Sheng, but the two had already made up their minds to let the people of the myriad Devil Ridge force Lu Yi to give up the spiritual land, so they naturally would not publicize it. After seeing the divine pillar, the cultivators of the myriad Devil Ridge, who were originally confident of victory, lost their fighting spirit and all of them felt that this trip was boring. They were too far away and could not stop Lu Yi and the others before they came into contact with the divine pillar. The ghost cultivators who were originally hiding in the dark might have a chance, but after learning from their mistakes, how would those ghost cultivators dare to casually sneak into the spiritual land now? After the divine pillar was revealed, no one spoke for a full 10 breaths. In the end, it was Song Jue who broke the silence. The deal that fellow Taoist Lu mentioned, is it related to this item? Lu Yi did not directly answer. Instead, he said, "There are so many of you gathered here for my life. Perhaps I can give you a chance?" Behind him, Li Baxian frowned and suddenly felt that something was not right. Feng Yuechan also sensed it and turned to look at Li Baxian. Both of them felt that Lu Ye's actions today were a little strange, but they did not disturb him out of trust. However, they did not know what Lu Yi was planning. Only Giant Armor stood there motionless like a mountain as if he did not care. His thoughts were simple. If there was a fight, he would rush to the front. If there was no fight, he would guard here. What do you mean? Song Jue did not understand. Very simple. Lu Yi looked at him. I will leave here, but you people of the myriad Devil Ridge cannot break into my spiritual land. Little junior brother. Li Baxian immediately shouted. At this moment he finally understood what Lu Yi was planning. He did not understand Lu Ye's actions. After all, escaping back to the 9 states was the safest choice. Why did little junior brother say such a thing? Lu Yi turned his back to him and said in a low voice, Senior brother, since I have been targeted by the people of the myriad Devil Ridge, there is no way I can hide. Unless I stay in the 9 states and not enter the Cloudy River battlefield, there will be all kinds of people who want to kill me. Last time, there was Xiao Liang and the others who somehow found this place. What about next time? No matter how well I hide, there will still be people who will come looking for me. Rather than hiding in one place, it is better to wander around. This way it will be difficult for others to lock onto my position. As for safety, senior brother does not need to worry too much. There are indeed many people who are stronger than me on the Cloudy River battlefield, but there should not be many who are faster than me. Moreover, I am very familiar with being hunted. Since the Spirit Stream battlefield, those who have tried to kill me have not had a good ending. The last sentence made Li Baxin's heart ache. Thinking back to his little junior brother's various encounters on the Spirit Stream battlefield, he was indeed often in a situation where he was being hunted. I understand what you are saying, but we cannot do this. Little junior brother, let's retreat from the 9 states according to the plan. We can talk about other things in the future. Senior brother, blindly hiding will not solve the problem. Only a strong counterattack will make them afraid. Since they dare to target me, I will kill them. If I hide this time, there will be a next time and a next time. Senior brother does not want to see me hide whenever I encounter trouble, right? Then I will go with you. Lu Yi shook his head. Senior brother, you can stay here and cultivate. Also, help me look after Giant Armor. With Giant Armor's personality, if no one restrains him, who knows what he will do. Moreover, it is more convenient for me to move alone. Li Baxin wanted to say something more, but Feng Yuechan gently tugged on his sleeve and said, Junior brother Lu, if you really do this, you will be in danger at all times. Are you confident? Anything depends on effort. In the air, Song Jue was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted. He asked in astonishment, this is the deal that fellow Taoist Lu mentioned? That's right. Song Jue frowned. He did not know what Lu Yi wanted to do. In the current situation, using the Heaven's Fate Pillar to return to the 9 states was the safest and most correct choice. However, he had proposed such a deal. This was undoubtedly a huge risk. At most, he would only be able to protect the spiritual land, but it would give the Myriad Demon Ridge an opportunity. However, the Myriad Demon Ridge had no reason to refuse such a deal. In fact, they would be happy to see it. Therefore, after pondering for a moment, Song Jue nodded. All right. No matter what the other party wanted to do, there was nothing wrong with agreeing. Do I need to swear a Heaven's Fate oath? Song Jue asked. This deal was too friendly to the Myriad Demon Ridge. It was so friendly that Song Jue would not feel at ease if he did not swear a Heaven's Fate oath. No need. Lu Yi indifferently said. As he spoke, he stepped to the side. Junior brother. Li Baxin still wanted to stop Lu Yi and grabbed his arm. Lu Yi looked at him with a smile. Senior brother, don't worry too much. There's no harm in experiencing more hardships. Their eyes met. Li Baxin saw the determination in Lu Ye's eyes. How could he not know that Lu Yi was right? After dodging this time, there would be a next time and a next time. He could not dodge in such a sorry state every time, but he was still worried. Even though Lu Yi was now able to stand on his own, the person in front of him was still the junior brother who needed his and Wei Yang's protection on the Golden Peak. After a long time, Li Baxin said, be careful. He also wanted to go with Lu Yi, but if he did, Feng Yuechan would definitely follow. At that time, Giant Armor could not be left behind. The 4 of them moving together was far less convenient than Lu Yi moving alone. I know. Lu Yi replied with a smile. Li Baxin let go of his arm. Lu Yi walked to the side and stood still. He circulated his spirit power and the lines of a large formation quickly lit up under his feet. Song Jue and the group of Myriad Demon Ridge cultivators stared in confusion, not knowing what the formation was. Within the formation, Lu Yi looked up at Song Jue and said softly, remember my deal with you. If anyone dares to break into my spiritual land, I will return to the Spirit Stream battlefield and destroy their sect's encampment. Song Jue finally understood why Lu Yi did not need him to swear a Heaven's Fate oath. Although the Heaven's Fate oath had an absolute binding effect, Lu Ye's threat was not bad. With this sentence before Lu Yi died, no one would dare to have any ideas about this spiritual land. Chapter 620. The lines in the array grew brighter and brighter, and the space around Lu Yi suddenly began to distort. Then he disappeared. This bizarre scene stunned everyone on the spot. Song Jue instinctively took a step forward, and the crowd behind him went into an uproar. In broad daylight, under the watchful eyes of so many people, a living person disappeared just like that. Moreover, it wasn't with the help of the Heaven's Fate Pillar. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed it. It's a transmission array. That's a transmission array. A voice suddenly shouted from the crowd. It was a formation cultivator. He had once seen the method of setting up a teleportation formation in an ancient book. He had been very interested in it and studied it for a period of time. However, he realized that with his talent in formations, he would never be able to set up such a complicated formation like the teleportation formation in his lifetime. The main reason was that it was too difficult to set up the void spirit veins, the core of the formation. Moreover, in the cultivation world of the 9 states, because of the Heaven's Fate pillar, transmission arrays were not very useful. Therefore, after studying it for a while, he had no choice but to give up. However, he still recognized the lines of a transmission array. He couldn't believe that someone in the Cloud River realm could arrange a transmission array that he couldn't arrange in his lifetime. Lu Ye's attainments in the Tao of arrays were probably beyond everyone's imagination. As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. Although they were shocked, they finally understood why Lu Ye disappeared into thin air. It was actually a transmission array. If there were Spirit Sea realm cultivators present, they might be able to perceive the fluctuations in space and detect the direction of Lu Ye's teleportation with their divine sense. However, a group of Cloud River realm cultivators didn't have such ability. Once Lu Ye's figure disappeared, they would no longer be able to track his whereabouts. Song Jure clenched his fists, his expression furious because he felt that he had been played by Lu Ye. The deal that Lu Ye proposed before was that he would leave the Spirit Land and give Myriad Demon Ridge a chance to kill him. In return, Myriad Demon Ridge would not destroy his Spirit Land. Otherwise, he would return to the Spirit Stream battlefield and destroy their sex station. Song Jure thought that Lu Ye would fly out of the Spirit Land. In his mind, as long as Lu Ye dared to leave the Spirit Land, he could immediately chase after him. A 5th-order Cloud River realm cultivator couldn't escape from him. But now that Lu Ye had been teleported away, who knew where he had been teleported to? Just as Song Jure was fuming, the array cultivator spoke again. Senior brother Song, Lu Ye shouldn't be far from here. His cultivation level isn't high, so the teleportation array he set up is limited. At most, it's 200 to 300 miles. Song Jure's expression changed. Are you sure? There's no mistake. The formation cultivator said decisively. Song Jure's eyes flashed with hope again. He immediately ordered, spread out and look for Lu Ye. If you find him, whistle as a warning. A distance of 200 to 300 kilometers was nothing to cultivators at the Cloud River tier. Thus, even if they temporarily lost sight of him, they might still be able to find him if they spread out. Following his order, the hundreds of cultivators outside the spiritual land immediately scattered in all directions. The current situation was undoubtedly a heaven-sent opportunity for the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators. All the cultivators here were at least at the 6th order, and all of them were confident that as long as they could find Lu Ye, they would be able to kill him. Previously, under Song Jure's leadership, the bounty for killing Lu Ye had to be divided equally with everyone. Now that they had the opportunity to monopolize the bounty, how could they miss it? Everyone was as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Inside the Spirit Land, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan watched the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators leave with complicated expressions. They no longer paid any attention to them. Feng Yuechan took out the jade slip that controlled the many spirit arrays in the Spirit Land and revealed a look of realization. So junior brother Lu had this plan all along. The spirit arrays in the Spirit Land were arranged by Lu Ye, so the jade slip array had naturally been controlled by him. However, just yesterday, Lu Ye found Feng Yuechan and handed the jade slip array to her. He even returned the small umbrella spirit artifact that he had borrowed from her. At that time, Feng Yuechan didn't understand why Lu Ye handed the jade slip array to her, but now that she thought about it, Lu Ye had no intention of returning to the 9 provinces from the very beginning. Thinking about it, he had been cultivating here peacefully, but people had come to him time and time again to provoke him. Under such circumstances, how could he stay? Last time in the hunting ground, he was forced to return to the 9 provinces once. This time, he was unwilling to repeat the same mistake, so he left and prepared to fight with the Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators. Senior brother, since junior brother Lu did this, he must have a plan. Feng Yuechan turned to Li Baxian and comforted him. Li Baxian sighed. In the end he was useless. If he had a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivation, he would have killed as many people as came today. His junior brother wouldn't have to be so aggrieved. He turned to look at Giant Armor. He thought that Giant Armor would be restless after Lu Ye left and might even chase after him. Who knew that this guy just stood there quietly as if nothing had happened? Then, the Giant Armor turned around and walked into its wooden hut to cultivate. Lu Ye looked for him yesterday and told him to stay here and wait. Just like when Lu Ye told him to wait in place, he ended up waiting for 2 months. Since Lu Ye told him to continue waiting, then he would just wait. There was no need to think too much. He would do whatever Lu Yi told him to do. Cultivate, Li Baxian said. Little junior brother took a huge risk to protect this grade A spirit land. Of course, he had his own considerations, but it was also because he wanted to leave a good cultivation environment for them. Little junior brother had left, so he couldn't help much. The only thing he could do was cultivate hard and improve his cultivation as soon as possible. If he encountered such a situation again one day, he would not be as powerless as he was today. Feng Yuechan activated the Jade Slip Array, activating the protective and concealing spirit arrays in the spirit land. Soon the vast spirit land disappeared. In a cave more than 200 kilometers away from returning Sky Spirit Land, Lu Ye's figure suddenly appeared. Although he was more than 200 kilometers away with the help of the transmission array, this location was not safe. The people of Myriad Demon Ridge would definitely spread out to search for him, so there was only one thing he needed to do right now, and that was to get as far away from returning Sky Valley as possible. It would be best if he left Great Mang Mountain. This was actually not too difficult for him. He had concealment and aura concealment spirit runes. Although he was a weapon cultivator, he also had the means of a ghost cultivator. Although there were many people in Myriad Demon Ridge, it would not be easy to find him. Walking out of the cave, Lu Yi was about to set off, but he was stunned. Not far in front of him, a pale guy with a weak aura and a black cat mask turned his head and looked in his direction. Their eyes met, and Lu Yi raised his hand and pressed the hilt of the mountain coiling saber with a playful expression. Wasn't this the ghost cultivator who had approached 20 meters from him just now? In such a short time, this person had actually come here and coincidentally bumped into him. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Lu Yi did not know the name of this ghost cultivator or where he came from, but he knew that the other party was a ninth-order cultivator. Under the black cat mask, Wu Ji showed a pleasantly surprised expression. He did not understand why Lu Yi would appear here, and for a moment he thought that the other party only looked similar to Lu Yi. However, the amber crouching on Lu Ye's shoulder was undoubtedly an eye-catching mark. It did not make sense for someone to look like Lu Yi and bring along an identical little beast. This guy is Lu Yi. No matter why the other party suddenly appeared here, for Wu Ji, he was a big fish that had delivered itself to his door. The two sides only exchanged glances for a short moment before they both moved. The two figures stirred up two gusts of wind and collided with a loud bang. Two short blades appeared in Wu Ji's hands at some point. The short blades were only 3 inches longer than the dagger and were completely black. They looked similar to the mountain coiling saber. However, the mountain coiling saber's appearance was caused by the woman who called herself Grandmaster Yu when it was being upgraded. The color of the short blades in Wu Ji's hands was deliberately made. He was a ghost cultivator and needed to be silent when attacking, so the black short blades would undoubtedly reduce the risk of being exposed. One of the short blades blocked Lu Ye's mountain coiling saber while the other went straight for Lu Ye's throat. The difference in cultivation was more than 4 minor realms. Wu Ji did not understand where Lu Yi got the courage to take the initiative to attack him, but he could almost foresee the scene of his opponent being killed in one blow. If he knew that Huoliao Yuan was thinking the same before he died, he would not be so relaxed. Under the sudden attack of an irresistible force, Wu Ji's expression immediately changed under the black cat mask. At this moment, he felt that he was not facing a fifth-order cultivator at all, but a master who was on par with him. Wu Ji could not help but lean back, and the short blade stabbing at Lu Ye's throat also lost its aim. He quickly stabilized his body, but Lu Ye's second blade had already landed. When cultivators fought, especially in this kind of close combat, there were often situations where one careless move could lead to a complete loss. At this moment, Wu Ji paid the price for his carelessness. When the second strike landed, the force behind it was even heavier than the first strike. Endless Shadow's arm that was holding the dagger felt numb. His body leaned back again, and this time he even took a few steps back. Then came the third, the fourth, ding ding dang 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 sounds rang out, and with each sound, Wu Ji had to take a few steps back. Originally he was only using one short blade to block, but now he was using 2. His arm went numb and the web between his thumb and forefinger cracked. Wu Ji's heart sank to the bottom. If he was at his peak, he would not be in such a sorry state, but when he sneaked into the spirit land, he was injured by several explosion arrays and was forced to use a secret technique to escape. Now, he could not even say that he was an arrow at the end of its flight. He could not even display half of his peak strength. But even if he only had half of his strength, it should be more than enough to deal with a fifth-order cultivator. But, was this the strength of a fifth-order cultivator? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.